Thank you for your patience. We are now being recorded on WebEx and live on YouTube.
Thanks, Catherine. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the December 15th, 2023 meeting of the New York State Commission on Forensic Science. Just so everyone knows, the commissioner is attempting to log in, but as Joe had mentioned before we went live, that she's not feeling well, so I have been given the honor of chairing this meeting. It is my pleasure to welcome our newest member to the commission, Stephen Epstein. He's the founding partner of Barkett, Epstein, Kiron, Aldea, and Turco LLP, and head of the firm's DWI and Vehicular Crimes Group. He will be the representative from the private criminal defense bar of the commission. So welcome.
Thank you. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
At this time, I will take attendance to establish a quorum. As there are members joining from New York, Albany, and virtually, we'll conduct business through the roll call. Please respond present when I call on you. Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Present.
Judge Mazzarelli?
Present.
Dr. Willie?
Present.
Dr. Buffalino?
Very quiet.
Pat, can you try again?
Present.
Right,
Present.
thank you, sir.
Sorry.
Ms. Roush?
Present.
Dr. Tiflin?
Present.
Ms. DeCastro? Is not present. Oh my gosh, I literally just got done in my brain saying, don't say her name because she's not in today's meeting. Off to a great swimming start, thank you. Dr. Marciano?
Present.
Ms. Schmitz?
Present.
Mr. Epstein?
Present.
Is that everyone? Ms. Goldthwait?
Present.
Skipped right over you. What am I doing? So, and including myself, we have established a quorum, although I will also specify Dr. Buffalino does not count towards quorum as he is remote, but he is able to vote.
He's under the extraordinary circumstances criteria, so that's why he's able to vote and not be counted towards the quorum.
So we'll go with the review and approval of the meeting agenda. You received an updated draft agenda for today's meeting. Is there any discussion regarding the agenda? Do I have a motion to approve the agenda? Ms. Schmitz has approved the agenda. Do I have a second? Judge Mazzarelli has seconded the motion. Please state your vote for the record when I call upon you. My vote is aye. Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Aye.
Judge Mazzarelli?
Aye.
Dr. Willie?
Aye.
Dr. Buffalino?
Aye.
Ms. Goldthwait?
Aye.
Ms. Roush?
Aye.
Mr. Epstein?
Aye.
Dr. Marciano?
Aye.
Ms. Schmidt?
Aye.
With that, the motion carries. You have also received a draft of the minutes from the September 22nd, 2003 meeting. Are there any questions or comments regarding the minutes? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Mr. Fitzpatrick has made the motion. Do I have a second? Judge Mazzarelli has seconded the motion. Please state your vote for the record when called upon. My vote is aye. Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Aye.
Judge Mazzarelli?
Aye.
Dr. Willie?
Aye.
Sorry, Ann, could you just say that again?
Aye.
Thank you so much. Dr. Buffalino?
Mic you up.
Aye.
Pat, I believe you said aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. Goldthwait?
Aye.
Ms. Roush?
Aye.
Mr. Epstein?
Abstain.
Epstein? Dr. Marciano?
Aye.
And Ms. Schmidt?
Aye.
With that, the motion carries. All right, we'll move on to accreditation laboratory updates. Today's agenda is packed full of fun, including informational updates. We'll start with the Nassau County Office of the Medical Examiner Division of Forensic Services. Again, this is for informational purposes and no vote is required. In October, A&EB conducted a surveillance assessment activity. Excuse me. There were no findings. ANAD has issued a continuation of accreditation based on the results of the assessment activity. Are there any questions for the lab? We do have folks available virtually. All right, hearing none. We'll move on to the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner, Department of Forensic Biology. Again, for informational purposes, no vote is required. In October, ANAD conducted a full reassessment for renewal of accreditation. There were 3 findings regarding 3 specific areas. 6.2.6, there was no formal authorization process for individuals designated to perform development, modification, verification, and validation methods. 7.8.1.2, technical records do not contain clear language that indicates when probabilistic genotyping is or is not used on indistinguishable mixtures. And 8.7.1, the effectiveness of remediation following quality incidents is not reviewed because the quality incidents are not officially deemed corrective actions by the laboratory. ANAD has accepted the remediation plan set forth by the laboratory and also has extended their due date for those remediations until January 15th of 2024. So we will be getting more information to follow once the remediation process has finished. So expect this again in the March meeting. But for now, are there any questions for the laboratory? I give a long pause, everyone, because Albany sometimes takes a minute for me to hear them, and I don't want to make them feel like I'm not hearing them, because I'm hearing you. Thumbs up, thank you.
Could I ask a we have to go to the lab. Maybe Mike could answer this, but like on page 24, the remedial action says the DNA profiles of the individual contributors to the mixtures could not be determined. However, the results are suitable for comparison. Comparison to what? I don't understand that.
I would probably have to go to the lab.
It's comparison to known exemplars.
You're going to need to speak up a lot.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So the answer to the question is, so there are certain times when you don't have exemplars to compare to unknowns, and in certain cases you do. But when there's a profile that's too difficult, even for STARMIX to interpret without the exemplars, it says, if you bring us exemplars, we can compare it for you if you request. So that's what that statement is there for. I know I shouldn't speak for New York City, but if somebody's there, but I think that's the intent of it.
I have a question as well.
You do?
Yep.
Okay. So if we could get, Kira, should I come? Just say your name. I'm Kira McKay, Quality Assurance Manager.
Tiffany Vasquez, DNA Technical Leader.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You provided the instances in your remediation plan, which I understand is still going on, right? ANAB granted you an extension of time.
Yes.
So just a preliminary question. Are you going to explain in the report why you don't do a STARMIX deconvolution? And could you just, I guess, explain for everyone what a deconvolution is?
Sure.
So a STARMIX, we used to do deconvolutions without the assistance of STARMIX, and now we use STARMIX to assist us with those. So the deconvolution is just trying to determine if we can determine an individual profile from individuals who have contributed to a mixture. If we can't, then we can use STARMIX to compare exemplars, like Dr. Buffalino stated, to determine if they might be a contributor to that mixture or if they might be excluded to that mixture. For cases, these were specifically criminal possession of weapons cases where we have no exemplar submitted up front. We were not running STARMIX up front. So the analyst would determine that it was a mixture that met our criteria for suitability for comparison in general. but they wouldn't run StarMix until we received an exemplar to compare to that mixture. And based on the finding, it just wasn't clear which cases we were doing that up front or not. It was listed in our protocol, but not in the report.
And why did the lab make the decision not to do decons first on that category of cases?
Primarily for efficiency purposes, and just the criminal possession of weapons cases. From our understanding, the general question is whether or not an exemplar may be associated with the DNA on that particular item. And if we don't have an exemplar, there's not a lot we can do with that data until we have that exemplar.
Anything else?
I do have a question about the nonconformance number 3. About whether corrective action is needed. Could you just explain when corrective action is actually needed with respect to nonconforming work? So for instance, are there categories of nonconforming work that do not require an official corrective action, and what is corrective action? When is it required?
Yes. So most of the nonconforming work instances that happen in the laboratory are one-off instances where we find an issue, we correct that issue, and we document it as a nonconformity, and that's it. The laboratory had defined corrective actions, particularly as findings in an audit, as well as more severe nonconformances, which would rise to the event of a significant event or root cause analysis, and those would require different follow-up. So audit findings would require remediation plans and communication with the assessment body. And then if it's a significant event, we have to follow the city law to do a root cause analysis committee and a full investigation. So that's how it was defined in our manual. Assessor had found that some of the nonconformances that we had that we treated solely as nonconformances because of the possible risk of it reoccurring. That's one of the criteria in the ISO standards, that if you think this could reoccur, you should institute corrective action, and there should be a monitoring step. So the assessor had felt that for a couple of the nonconformances we had, sometimes we did follow up, but other times we did not monitor the effectiveness of the remediation, and she felt that the procedure could be more straightened out and make it more clear when we have to do these things, and to have a formal documented process for it.
Okay.
That was the difference.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, ladies. All right, next we'll move on to the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner Forensic Anthropology Unit. Again, for informational purposes, no vote is required. In November, ANAB conducted a surveillance assessment activity. There were no findings. The lab is waiting for their final documents from ANAB, so we'll expect to see those the next meeting. In the meantime, are there any questions for the lab? Hearing none, we'll move on to the New York City Police Department Police Laboratory. Again, for informational purposes, no vote is required. In October, ANAB conducted a surveillance assessment activity. There were no findings. ANAB has issued a continuation of accreditation based on the results of the assessment activity. Are there any questions for the lab? Hearing none. Move on to the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services Latent Print Laboratory. In November, ANAB conducted a surveillance assessment activity. There were no findings. ANAB has issued a continuation of accreditation based on the results of the assessment activity. Do we have any questions for this laboratory? All right, moving along. Niagara County Sheriff's Office Forensic Laboratory. Again, this is for informational purposes and no vote is required. The laboratory notified DCJS that their new quality assurance manager, Kevin Condell, would be starting October 23rd, so he has since started. The laboratory also provided Kevin's CV, and an updated organizational chart. There also was a notification that there was a scope change submitted from the laboratory to remove NIBIN services. The request was approved by ANAB and an updated scope was provided. We do have some folks available virtually. Yes, virtually. Are there any questions for the lab?
Well, I was wondering if you could ask Mr. Kondo how it's going since he just started.
Okay, Catherine, could you bring them up?
Christine and Captain, whenever you're ready, if you could unmute yourself and turn on your cameras if possible.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay.
Thanks. Good morning. Welcome, Mr. Kondo. I just wanted to ask, since you started as quality assurance manager, right, in late October, how it's going?
Well, definitely got started very early and very fast, and I have the background experience to where I was able to look through the quality manual, make some improvements and some updates. And I think we're off to a good start. We've done several corrective actions along the way. We're in the middle of an audit, and we've done our management reviews, and we're heading into the end of the year items. Next year, we've got probably 2 to 3 years of ideas and improvements on how to just make sure that the system's robust. A lot of organization efforts, but we're getting there.
Great. Let me say we're a resource or a little working group if you want to reach out or something.
I think so. Mr. Condell, would just let you know that there is a working group that's been developed by the commission, and Jessica just wants to make sure that you know that we're here as a resource for you. If you have any questions, concerns, need any advice or assistance in something, please feel free to reach out to the Office of Forensic Services, and we can coordinate a meeting with the working group.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To Kevin or Christine, a quick question. Is the disconnection or the discontinuation of the NIBIN system, was that a staffing issue?
Yes, it is. It is a staffing issue. We had our contractor who was performing our NIBIN verifications off-site. He was no longer able to perform that function. And now that NIBIN is set up in the CAC Center in Niagara Falls, that particular function is being covered. All the agencies are able to go and do NIBIN at that facility. We are in the process of training a new firearms analyst who just started this week. And with that, we're going to be evaluating whether we need to bring that service back or not.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Pat, I believe I saw his hand up earlier.
I've got it's a quick question. Hey, Christine, good morning.
Morning.
Right now, just from the org chart, it looks like you've got 2 people, and obviously I get it. If you don't have the people for NIBIN, then the CACs are a good idea. But how, at this point, like, are you sending out your TRs on microscopic verification that have verified? Because you've only got, now it seems like you've got 2 people, and I don't, right? I'm pretty sure if this individual does the case, McKellar does the case, and Mark Shaw verifies it, who's there for the TR at that point?
So right now, it's Mark Shaw doing the analysis. We were having Cody be the verifier, and he also was doing the technical review. However, at this point, we're looking at a third-party company, and we're in the process of negotiating a contract with them to cover all of that, so that we'll have more resources at our disposal.
Okay. anyone have an issue with the verifier also being the TR person? Any A&AB? Have they seen the new? Because there might be an issue with someone verifying also doing the TR, so that's something you may need to look into with A&AB.
Okay.
I was just looking at staffing numbers there.
I come from Texas. So Texas DPS routinely had verifiers also be the technical reviewers, and they often had ample people to separate them. Were we in the position to where we would have the ability to separate those functions? We absolutely would. Unfortunately, you're balanced with the caseload effort and whether or not that justifies the hiring of those additional positions. So many cases you're not given the ability to hire more than one or two people for that. So you do what you can to the best of the ability.
As long as your accreditors don't have an issue with that, then that's fine. I'm just thinking about the workflow.
Of course.
Of course. Thank you, Pat.
I have one more question too. So was there any feedback from the customers? I mean, knowing that the CACs are there, my assumption is it probably wasn't. It wasn't as they weren't as concerned knowing that there was somewhere else to take their evidence, I guess. So there would know the feedback was, I guess, what was. Could you talk about it?
Correct. The feedback has, we haven't had any negative feedback. It's been communicated at various stakeholder meetings with the sheriffs and the chiefs. We are in the process of creating a protocol that we're putting out so that they know exactly how to handle different scenarios, such as if they want DNA along with NIPIN to bring it here first, and we'll arrange it at that point. So those are all in writing, and they will be going out hopefully by the end of this year.
You just answered my last question, so thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good luck and congratulations on the new job.
Thanks, sir.
Mike, did you have a question?
No, I got it answered.
Got it answered? Perfect. Anyone else? Anyone in Albany? All right, thank you, Christine and Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on now to the Onondaga County Center for Forensic Science Laboratory. Again, for informational purposes, no vote is required. In September, A&AD conducted a surveillance assessment activity. There were no findings, but there was an opportunity for improvement suggested by the auditors. The assessor felt that the lab would benefit from recording reasonable timeframes for the completion of the corrective action in the QMS workflow record. It should be noted that, again, the recommendation such as these would require no action. It's just a recommendation. A&AB has issued a continuation of accreditation based on the results of the assessment activity. Are there any questions for the lab? We have some folks available virtually. Hearing none, we'll move on to Suffolk County Crime Lab. Again, for informational purposes, no vote is required. The laboratory notified A&AB and DCJS that Donald Dollar has retired effective October 30th, and Connie Dinkle is the interim acting chief, and Roy Sino is the interim acting assistant chief of the lab. Effective December 11th, those titles were upgraded to chief and assistant chief. The laboratory has provided Chief Dinkle's CV for review. Are there any questions? Other than congratulations, Don, on a long career. It was a pleasure to work with you. And welcome to Connie. Even though she's been a long time around with us, but in a newer capacity. Okay. Moving on to old business. We'll give you a familial search update now that the gates have resumed, right? Now that the lawsuit is over and we are back at it. I will give you the updated numbers. We have, since our last report out, an additional application has been approved and 2 additional applications received. They're both renewals and they're still pending approval. And 1 additional case was closed. So to recap everything, 55 applications have been received. 43 are initial, 8 are resubmissions, and 4 renewals. Of those, 13 were rejected, 2 were withdrawn, 2 are still pending approval, and 38 have been approved. There are 8 currently in the queue to be processed. Do we have any questions regarding familial search?
Do we have any information as to what the results of any of them are?
So we have 2 that aided in an arrest, but they have not been litigated at this point. That's all we have. So every 6 months, we do send out, for those that did receive results, we send out a request for an update on the status of what those familial search results have helped with or not helped, or if they've closed the case or whatever that may be. So as of right now, we just know of the 2 that have assisted in an arrest. Thank you. You're welcome. Anyone else? Alrighty. Next up, we have the Niagara County Sheriff's Office of Forensic Laboratory. So at the September meeting, the commission voted to request that ANAB provide investigative documentation related to the report for the Niagara County Sheriff's Office. We requested that of Pam Sale of ANAB, and she has provided a response that is in your materials. If there are any questions for ANAB, we can get Pam available. Are there any questions?
Well, I had a question. I'm not sure if it's, well, I suppose it's for Pam. Yeah.
Catherine, can we get Pam up?
We do have a caller in. It might be Pam. Give me 1 second. Caller in, can you identify yourself, please?
Calling user, can you unmute yourself so we can find out who you are, if you are Pam? If not, we'll have to give a pause, reach out to her offline. Okay. So, not available at the moment. We will come back to that.
Okay,
as soon as we can get her on.
If possible.
Catherine, if you just want to interrupt and let me know when she joins and bring her up, that's fine. We can proceed with that.
Will do.
Okay. Smoothly moving along here. Next up, we have lab disclosures. We have the Erie County Central Police Services Forensic Laboratory. This is for informational purposes. No vote is required. The first set of documents you received is a closeout of an issue of an analyst missing the identification of spermatozoa on a cell pellet slide discovered during reanalysis. The original notification was presented at the June Commission meeting. The lab has investigated the issue. They've issued amended reports and modified their procedures to require the verification of negative or inconclusive slides by a second analyst. The second set of documents that you received is an initial notification and closure of an issue involving unexpected results of the DNA proficiency test. The laboratory has investigated the issue and updated their DNA manual and procedures. We have folks available virtually if there are any questions for the lab.
Yes.
Catherine, if we could bring Maria and or Tom up.
Maria, whenever you're ready, if you would please turn on your camera and audio.
Unless, of course, Michelle would like to speak to it, or she's going to defer right to Maria.
It depends, but probably defer. My background is not DNA.
Okay. Maria, how are you? You're up.
How are you? Can you hear us?
Barely. You're going to need to yell in. You're going to need to use your outside voice, not your church voice. And we'll get it. There we go. Thank you. Go ahead, Jessica.
Hi, good morning. This might have been discussed at a previous meeting in reviewing your closeout of the failure to detect sperm during examination of slides. One of the things the lab investigated was whether procuring gridded slides might assist an analyst in making sure they don't miss, a sample that doesn't have very many sperm in it. But you did deem those gridded slides unsuitable for casework. And again, apologies if you explained this at the last meeting, but why were they unsuitable for casework?
The grid lines themselves were thick and dark, so the cellular material got deposited on the grid lines.
Hang on a second, Mark. Can you, or Tom, sorry, can you speak up?
Yep, sorry. So the grid lines themselves were dark, and so if any cellular material got deposited on the grid lines, you couldn't see it.
So you were worried that you might miss sperm because it was actually adhering to the grids themselves?
Yes, correct.
Is that what he's saying? The line, in other words, the line might be hiding the sperm
The
cell?
sperm, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. And can you remind me, how was this issue how did you uncover that an analyst had failed to detect sperm in the first instance? Was it a routine reanalysis, or how did you detect this?
It was a reanalysis, yes.
And what is the Y-screen method you use now? Is it the Ceratec PSA semi-quant, or is it something else?
It's Promega's Casework Direct Kit.
Sorry, I can't.
Promega's Casework Direct Kit.
Okay.
What did he say?
Promega, yeah.
Promega real-time.
kit.
Did anyone else have a question on the sperm? Because I had okay. With respect to the new disclosure, I just want to make sure I got this right. So there was a proficiency test and 4 separate analysts failed to detect some of the alleles for the assumed contributor to a sample. So what was it, like a mock sex assault kind of case? Okay. And the alleles that the 4 analysts failed to detect were of the mock complainant or victim in the case, right?
Correct.
And in your documentation, you concluded that, this is page 101 for the commissioners, the absence of non-probative assumed female alleles within a DNA profile is insignificant and therefore was not of concern when determining the casework direct procedure. Can you just explain what you mean by insignificant and how you determined it was insignificant?
So if the samples are from a body cavity, for example, a vaginal swab, you would expect to find their DNA on those samples. The probative sample is the male portion that we're looking for. So if we're missing a few of the female alleles from the victim, those wouldn't go to CODIS. There's no purpose to re-amplify the sample to try and get a full profile when you're concerned with the male portion.
Sure. No, I understand that you're looking for the putative perpetrator, and in that kind of scenario where you have a female victim and a male perpetrator, I understand what you're saying, but did you test to see, right, you're a StarMix lab, is that right?
Yes.
Do you use StarMix on every interpretation or only some?
When we do comparisons, we use StarMix.
Okay. Did you do any testing, I don't know if in your casework direct validation or not, but did you do any testing to see if, you're assuming, right, the female minor, if missing data would affect the resulting likelihood ratio?
Well, when you condition on a victim you essentially subtract them from the mixture. So it would not have an effect on the LR for the male.
Okay. And you've tested this in a validation study?
Yes, we validated this, yes.
Okay. Is there any difference between a true contributor and a non-contributor when they're being compared to a mixture? With respect to the effect of the absence of the assumed contributors' alleles?
So when you condition on someone, StarMix doesn't produce an LR for the conditioned person, just for like suspect, for example. I'm not sure I understand your question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether there, and I don't know the answer. I'm wondering if the absence of data in an assumed contributor would affect the resulting likelihood ratio, and what would affect that? Would it matter if you're comparing it to a true contributor, right? Someone who really did, like a male who really did leave their DNA in a sample, or maybe if you have a very degraded or low template sample, whether that would affect a correct exclusion of a true non-contributor. I just didn't know if this was covered either in your StarMix validation or this casework direct validation.
So we did.
Like what data there was to support this conclusion that it was insignificant?
Well, it's insignificant, meaning that wasn't the probative profile. That's what I meant by insignificant.
Okay. And what about the question with respect to whether this was tested in validation? If I made it clear, which I may not have.
Yes, during our StarMix validation, we did run numerous LRs where we conditioned on individuals.
And in your validation, missing some alleles of the assumed contributor did not affect the resulting LR when compared to a male, and did you distinguish between true contributor and non-contributor?
Well, I guess that would be profile dependent. In some instances it may, in other instances it may not.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you, Tom and Maria.
Thanks.
We do have Pam on now, so we will reverse just a moment. Go back to our old business regarding the investigative documentation that ANAB did provide. So Pam, if you can unmute yourself. I have no idea what it is on the phone. I forgot star something. Star 3?
Not star 69.
No, that's a readout.
Aging ourselves.
Yeah, right, that's right.
An attendee has raised their hand, but we cannot get them unmuted. Catherine, can you unmute them or no? Do they have to do it?
She should have to do it.
All right. Can you hear me now?
There we go. Good morning, Pam.
Good morning.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Good morning. Thank you for providing additional detail. I did want to ask, though, the letter that Dr. Dooley had sent on behalf of the commission in October requesting additional information. We requested the documents used to support your conclusion, and we didn't receive it from you, although we did get more detail and context, but sort of in a summary fashion. So I wanted to ask why you did not provide it. And I also wanted to ask, maybe it's the same answer, why in your response you stated that you believe the added details in the letter would provide the needed clarity for the commission without providing the requested documents for the commission to independently reinvestigate the complaint. If you could explain that, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, ANAB has never provided investigative documents to the commission or anyone else for that matter. And pulling all of those documents out of our system is going to be extremely time consuming for me to do. And without having context to what things are, it's just going to create more questions than provide answers. So I went through and provided the context for my responses and my findings in the initial report to address what the concerns were from Mr. Fitzpatrick that I heard at the last meeting. So that's why you got the additional report with the added information.
Let me ask ADA Fitzpatrick, do you feel that your questions...
EA.
Yeah. What did I say? ADA. Oh, gosh, I'm so used to saying ADA. I'm so sorry. I gave you an emotion. DA.
Right?
I'll try to concentrate on your question.
Thank you. So,
Yes, I think
30
material like
years.
that satisfies my curiosity.
I know
Thanks,
that.
Jess.
We good? Pam, thank you for joining us.
Sure. Thank you. Goodbye.
Hi. All right, move on to the Erie County Medical Examiner's Office of Forensic Toxicology Lab. For informational purposes, no vote is required. This is an initial notification and a closeout of issues involving unexpected PT results. The laboratory investigated both results and determined that the unexpected acetaminophen result was determined to be due to the incorrect preparation of calibrators and controls by the analyst. This was determined to be an isolated incident and no casework was impacted. And the unexpected carboxy-THC result was determined to be due to poor pipetting of the sample. It was also determined to be due to poor pipetting of the sample, it was determined to be an isolated incident and no casework was impacted. The analyst has been removed from the cannabinoids confirmation and completed pipette training. Are there any questions for the lab? We do have someone available virtually. Okay, hearing none. We'll move on to the Nassau County Office of Medical Examiner Toxicology Laboratory. Again, for informational purposes and no vote is required. The first set of documents you received is the initial disclosure of a postmortem autopsy specimen that was inadvertently disposed of. The case was awaiting additional testing. However, after disclosing the issue to the pathologist, it was determined that it did not affect their interpretation. The laboratory is investigating the issue and has determined that there was a clerical error made when noting the case completion date in their Excel log. The lab will provide updates after further remediation. And the second set of documents is an update regarding an analyst who was removed from a drug screening method. The original notification was presented at the March Commission meeting. The analyst had completed the remediation and been reauthorized to perform the drug screening method. The laboratory will evaluate the effectiveness of the remediation within 6 months. Are there any questions for the lab? We have folks available virtually. Okay. Moving on, New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner, Department of Forensic Toxicology. For informational purposes, no vote is required. This is the initial notification and closeout of a false positive result in a proficiency test. The laboratory has investigated the issue and determined that it was human error. No cases were affected, and the laboratory has notified staff of the investigation. Are there any questions for the lab? We have someone available virtually.
Yes.
Okay, Catherine. Alba, if we can bring her up.
Well, whenever you're ready, you can unmute yourself and turn on your video.
Morning, Alba. How are you?
That's okay.
Wait, what?
No, we're in New York. We moved on.
Tox, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's half the challenge of this. Is
We can
keeping
hear you, but gosh, we sure are having a hard time. So we're going to need you to project in your best voice. Jessica?
Good morning.
Morning.
I just wanted to ask you about, in your investigation, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce this, but you pulled all the cases where isotonid, no, do you know what I mean?
Isotonicity.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to call it ISO, and if that's what I mean. So you did pull all your casework where that ISO had been reported, and that was 11 cases?
Correct.
Okay. You said that for 10 of those ISO cases, they had ISO positive on a synthetic opioids method, which we've proven conclusively shows that ISO was correctly reported. What do you mean by proven conclusively, and how did you determine it was a conclusive thing?
So the investigation revealed that when running the synthetic opioids method, we can identify isotonicity without issue. Can you hear me?
Hold on one second. I'm sorry to interrupt. We're just having sound issues. There's nothing we can do.
Oh, that's going to be. So we get a lot of feedback from Albany when we raise. Can you guys mute in Albany just for a second? Is that possible to mute the mics on the tables? Okay, now if we can try and raise her, Lindsay. Great. Go ahead, Alba.
Okay, so the investigation showed that when we ran the synthetic opioids method, we were able to identify isotonitazine without issue because protonitazine, which was the one in question, doesn't appear in that window. So when looking back at those cases, there was no shift and the isotonitazine peak was there in the synthetic opioid method. So that wasn't the method that we had a question with, it was the opioids method. So for those cases, because we ran it on the synthetic opioids method, we were able to conclusively identify because we had no issue with that, the way the peak appeared in the window.
Okay.
I have one question.
Go ahead.
Hi, how are you? I just want to understand why you'd attribute this to random human error. Could you elaborate on that?
It was an oversight by the reviewer. When they looked at the opioids method, there was a slight shift in retention time, and it was also our lack of knowledge. You know, like we didn't run the protonitazine standard, so we didn't know the retention time for that one. So with this slight shift, it was just an oversight, and we incorrectly reported it as isonitazine.
Got it. Thank you.
Anyone else here in New York? Okay, so we're going to lower the volume for the call-in person, and then we can unmute Albany. Otherwise, we get horrible feedback. This is technology at its finest. Yes, it is 2023. And then, Alba, let me just make sure that Albany, are we good to go? Any questions? No, I'm here. No shit. Okay, thank you, Alba.
Welcome.
All right. So moving on to the New York City Police Department latent print section. This is for informational purposes and no vote is required. The first set of documents is regarding an internal proficiency test issue that was initially disclosed at the September Commission meeting. The first set of documents is regarding an internal proficiency test issue that was initially disclosed at the September Commission meeting. The second set of documents is regarding an internal proficiency test issue that was initially disclosed at the September Commission meeting. The third set of documents is regarding an internal proficiency test issue that was initially disclosed at the September Commission meeting. The fourth set of documents is regarding an internal proficiency test issue that was initially disclosed at the September Commission meeting. The fifth set of documents is regarding an internal proficiency test issue that was initially disclosed at the September Commission meeting. The sixth set of documents is regarding an internal proficiency test issue that was initially disclosed at the September Commission meeting. The seventh set of documents is regarding an internal proficiency test issue that was initially disclosed at the September Commission meeting. The eighth set of documents is regarding an internal proficiency test issue that was The laboratory has submitted a quality action report indicating the analyst was retrained and will be assigned a new proficiency test. And the second set of documents involved the potential Brady-Giglio issue that was also initially discussed at the September Commission meeting. The laboratory submitted documents from the investigation that was done previously in 2015, including reports produced by the external expert that they had retained, and a final report that was including a root cause analysis, case reviews, and corrective actions. As a reminder, this happened prior to ANAB accreditation and prior to falling under the purview of the New York State Commission on Forensic Science with New York State accreditation. The laboratory is continuing to identify cases where courtroom testimony was provided by the analysts following the misidentification. Are there any questions for the lab? Yes. Would you like to introduce yourselves, please?
Yes, sure. Good morning. I'd like to make a statement if I can, just to give some clarity. I'm Brian McGee. I'm the commanding officer of Forensic Investigations. I apologize for not being here at the last commission meeting, but I'd like to give you a little further explanation or clarity why a notification was made this year in relation to a 2015 misidentification. Earlier this year, in 2023, I was made aware of a difference in opinion in relation to a case that was getting ready for court in Manhattan through the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. It was a 2016 case that was originally assigned to Detective Rex, who has since retired in 2019. Normal course of business when a retired detective's case is called to court, an additional latent print examiner within the office would take on that case and present the case to the district attorney. Eventually, it got to my attention because there was a difference in opinion with the newly assigned investigator as to Rex's identification in that 2016 case. I had asked for further latent print examiners to take a look at that case, and eventually it got back to me that there was a difference of opinion still. At that time, I had asked for that print of Detective Rex's original identification for that 2016 case be sent out to an external reputable latent print agency. Eventually, that did come back that Rex's print was a proper identification. But during that time, before that came back from the external latent print agency, I had asked to have a meeting with the legal bureau from the NYPD to explain what was going on. That was when I found out, because I found out about the original misidentification in 2015. There was a difference of opinion of a current court case. That's the reason why I sent it out. And I wanted to also present that to the legal bureau. It was at that time that it was realized that it was potentially, and as we know, that a blanket notification was not made to the district attorney's office in relation to the 2015 misidentification. So if that gives some clarity, I know I watched the video from the last time, but that gives a little bit more clarity to why it was made this year to the commission, the 2015 misidentification.
Thank you.
But just to follow up on that, the report from Manny was the final root cause analysis of how this happened. I guess my question is, why were the DA's offices not notified in 2016 and only just earlier this year?
You mean in relation to the 2015? I don't want to confuse it. The 2016 case is
no, the 2015 case.
I can't answer for why not. I think an original notification was made to one district attorney's office. I can't answer as to why. But when it came to the attention that it wasn't, we wanted to make sure that it was.
Okay. My understanding is the original quote notification was to Rachel Singer, and Rachel is, even back then, considered extremely knowledgeable in the area of forensic science, primarily DNA, and she received, correct me if I'm wrong, she receives a phone call from a detective, hey, I've got this print, but we got a problem. The guy was in Creedmoor, and some investigation is done. He wasn't on any type of release program or anything like that. It's not him. And her instructions is, okay, don't arrest anybody. And then a couple of phone calls are made that week from her back and forth to her and the then lab or latent print section director. You got to do an analysis of this. That analysis was done, in my judgment, done very thoroughly, but it begs the question, why with that thorough analysis, why was Rachel not contacted again or anybody else in the other 4 boroughs where this fellow Rex might have testified?
So I can't answer to why they weren't. I know Rachel a very long time. I've been with the police department for 33 years. I know Rachel well over a decade. Professional, I understand that. I just don't know why at that time, why it wasn't a blanketed notification. But the reports that you're reading is correct. There was never an arrest made in relation to this misidentification. There was never an arrest made. An investigation was, and it was an excellent investigation that was conducted. And that person was never arrested.
Okay. And I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here, but there was an email sent. I think the lead individual on the email was Ray Valerio back in October and submitted a series of questions to NYPD. You're not familiar with that?
No, I think I know what you're talking about.
I'm just curious. My speaking with him this week, they have not received an answer to that. Do you have plans to respond to their inquiries?
So we've had, I want to say, at least 7 since the misidentification coming alight. We've had 7 working group meetings in relation to this.
That involve the DAs?
All the DAs. All the DAs involved, yes.
And U.S. attorneys.
And the U.S. Attorney's offices, both Southern and Eastern District.
One of the questions in that email was why Martinez left NYPD, if it was related to this. Do you know the answer to that?
I think we did answer it. I think it was actually in the report as well. He was, I want to say, sort of newly assigned. I think he had a total of like 44 identifications, and I think it was just best with something like that to happen to somebody so early in his career that it was just sort of a punch in the gut that I don't know if he could come back at something like that. So it was decided that he was removed, and that was discussed on our last call.
Okay.
So that answer was given.
And my understanding is, again, talking to my colleagues in the city, is that all 5 DA's offices in the city are attempting to review Rex's testimony at trials. Are you assisting in that review?
So anything we could, and we asked them for assistance also, because we've gone back, Jen, Lieutenant Joseph have gone back and excruciate and look at any court appearances, notifications, anything to that matter, to give to each of the district attorney's office in Southern or Eastern districts to ensure that they have stuff to look at. And we asked them if they found stuff to give it back to us as well. So, yes.
And understanding is that back during the root cause analysis that Manny did, he brought in an outside agency to not only review, but to do some additional training.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, LPS is accredited.
Correct.
So you're reviewed by ANAB. Do you have any plans to bring in any other outside agency to review what happened in 15? Do you see any need to do that?
So I'll let Jen answer that, but I don't think we need to go back to 2015. We always do training as course of business. We have directed training, I think it's coming up in either February or March, in relation to distortion. So we always do that, and we are. Yeah.
But to answer your question, no, I don't think we see any need to bring in an independent person to come back and look at it in 2015, when in 2015 we brought in an independent person to look at what was going on then. So we feel as though it's been done.
My question is not suggesting that you do.
No, okay.
It's just a question.
Yeah.
Okay. I may have some follow-up, but thanks.
Can I just say to you really quickly, reminder again, making the disclosure now is good practice, but do understand, I just want my fellow commission members to understand that there was not an obligation for matters for 2015 as they weren't accredited, and that notification was not mandatory back then. So when we go back and we say, why wasn't the notification, and if you've only notified one district attorney, keep that in mind for perspective as to why what's happened has happened. But also I want to say that the investigation that was done then, as we can see from the documentation, was extensive, thorough, and very complete, and not required to be done at that time, but would definitely hold up to the standard of being an accredited laboratory now. So I would like to just commend you on that. And also I think that puts the work in a very good position because you have already done that evaluation. I will now turn it over to Justin.
I'm just looking at my notes from from Manny's report, and I apologize for keep calling him Manny, but I can't pronounce his last name. Katranakis. In April, on April 21st of 2015, it was actually Rachel Singer that notified Robert Pecoraro of LPS about the nonconformity, and then it was her that suggested a reanalysis be done. And after April of 2015, I don't see any reference or anything in writing that she was further notified, and I think we've conceded that. I'd also, just for the record, like to thank Kathy Corrado, who used to be a member of this commission, who for years spearheaded the notion that forensic print laboratories should be accredited. I tell you that, in upstate New York, you can have, you had historically people attend a 2 to 3 week seminar and then would testify as fingerprint experts, which I think all of us at this table and in this room today would think would be ridiculous. So thank her, or I'm thanking her for spearheading that. I'm sorry, Justin.
No.
Make a quick point. The documentation that we have does actually indicate that ADA Singer was notified after the external people came and looked at it, and it was deemed a misidentification. If you notice in the redacted document, it's section, the corrective action section, the very last point F.
Okay, on page 175 of our commission document, it says, quote, ADA Singer was notified. Well, that's correct if that is in reference to the April 2015 notification. It's a very carefully worded entry by Mr. Katranakis. ADA Singer was notified. It doesn't say what date she was notified, and there's nothing in writing. There's no memo, there's no email connected to the report to suggest that she had any involvement in this after April of 2015.
Right. I'm seeing ADA Singer was notified of the possible latent print misidentification. That's the sentence I have here.
On page one, you're talking about
I don't have your packet.
Page 7.
Mine's on page 7, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
7F.
And you're right, it doesn't have a date there, but it's a point that was made after the re-examinations were done by the external experts.
There's nothing in that statement by Mr. Katranakis to indicate that after the external exam was done, ADA Rachel Singer was notified of that investigation and result. I think that's a very carefully worded statement to suggest that she was notified, and she was in April of 2015.
And just to add, Chief Katranakis and the whole team back then, from what I see, did a very professional thing. But it's the NYPD's responsibility to make, and we own our history, we own our mistakes. If you Monday morning quarterback this, the only thing I would say is you wish that notification would have went out then, a blanketed one. And I don't think that is Rachel Singer's responsibility. I think it comes to our responsibility.
I appreciate you saying that. I totally agree with you. And I'm a little biased because my father was a 20-year veteran of NYPD. And
thank you for your service.
Taught me to own my mistakes too. So thank you.
Jessica?
Thanks. And thanks for that statement. I think I'll have some follow-up questions about the 2016 disagreement that you spoke about. But I wanted to ask you first, just to get some clarity about what cases in the past have actually been reviewed, and then I'll move on. But I noted in Chief Katranakis's memo that there were some so I'm looking at page 4 of his memo, preliminary root causes.
Just what page is that for us?
Oh, for us, it's 172. Yeah. And there is a list of various potential causes of this misidentification. So one of them is a lack of requirement for a latent print examiner to mark the detail in a crime scene print prior to performing a search of a database. Am I understanding that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. And another cause that you label, or Chief Katranakis labeled a quality system failure of context bias, that there is this sort of circular or contextual bias at work with at least the original examiner. Could you explain that a little more, please?
The context bias?
Yes, please.
Sure. So in examining a latent print and comparing it to a known print, first what needs to be done, or what should be done, is there should be a review of the latent print before you even look at any comparison. And you look at the minutia that you can identify, and you mark those minutia, you identify them as being suitable for comparison. And that's to eliminate any bias by, if you had done, for example, what appeared to have happened here was they looked at the exemplar, found a point, and then somehow managed to find a point in the latent print, which could or could not have been there, because with a latent print, there's distortion and there's movement. So I think that was what the backward reasoning was that the examiner was not starting with the unknown, making the appropriate determination of what was suitable for comparison, and then seeing if there was something that matched it in the exemplar.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And that was found to be a contributing factor to the 2015 misidentification.
Yes.
Okay. Then another causal factor was the misinterpretation of the ACE-V method. Could you explain that?
Yeah, so they are sort of related, I think, those two.
Right.
But with the misinterpretation of the ACE-V method, it appears the examiner was relying upon the distorted print and distortions in the print to explain away any differences that they had seen in the exemplar. So, in theory, the exemplar is a pretty clear print. That's not always true, but in theory it is.
Right.
And a latent print most often is not completely clear, and it's certainly not a complete print. So it appears that the examiner was finding prints in the exemplar, say an ending ridge, it looks like the end of a line, and was able to somehow find that in the latent print, but there was distortion there, so the distortion couldn't clearly account for that.
And then the final contributing factor that's listed here, and if you have come up, or if you have any ideas about additional ones, I would love to hear them, but was that it appeared that examiners in the latent print unit were searching the criminal history of suspects before or during their examination of the latent print, which Chief Katranakis concluded would create a context bias, and would have a biasing effect on the fingerprint examination. It did appear that this was a widespread practice, or at least was a practice engaged in by analysts beyond Rex, Sanabria, and Martinez. Is that the case?
Yes, I think it was, yes.
Okay, and how long did that go on?
I think it went on until this misidentification occurred, and then they created a policy to not do it anymore.
Right. I guess I'm losing, if I could request clarification about what casework was actually examined, both before, going back before 2015 and since then, of not just, let me ask it this way, was any latent print casework by analysts other than Rex, Nabri, and Martinez evaluated for accuracy with respect to this whole incident?
In a roundabout way, yes, because all cases with criminal ID have 3 different people looking at it. So by looking at Rex's cases, looking at Sanabri's cases, we are looking at 2 other people's work at the same time.
But isn't that the system that failed here with this?
It is the system that failed here, but they did go back and they looked at 413 cases and evaluated those identifications that were made and determined that they were fair. And after the fact, we've gone back and we've looked at 56 at this point, and all of them were confirmed.
So sorry, I'm just losing track. So who, when you say they, who went back and looked at, what was it, 416 cases?
That was done by the technical leader in the major case unit, another examiner in the major case unit, and the sergeant in charge of the major case unit, according to the documentation that we saw.
Okay. What does fair mean?
What is fair?
You said that they went back and reviewed the results, and I think, and please correct me if I misspoke, but you said the results were fair. Does that mean concordant? What is the same results?
I don't know why I said that.
Okay,
No,
that's okay, that's okay.
Were confirmed. The identifications that were made originally were, I don't know why I said that, were confirmed by the people who re-examined them.
So I want to be sure that I understand, because there is a class of cases, right, where, I mean, it's easy to identify, not easy to identify, but right, you have a false positive or you have a false negative, but then you have this inconclusive category. And I know there's maybe a difference of opinion on how you treat inconclusives that are true exclusions. So when you say the results are concordant, I just want to be very specific about that cases that if an analyst went back and said, well, I would have regarded this as inconclusive, maybe leaning on the exclusion side, they said it was exclusionary, or vice versa, right? Like if the original analyst had said it was inconclusive, but a subsequent re-examination said actually it was an exclusion. Did you have any instances of that, where there was a difference between a clear, let me be clear, between a clear conclusion versus an inconclusive conclusion?
Right, so the paperwork that we have here doesn't specifically say anything, but the latent print section did not actually start using the inconclusive conclusion until after this occurred. And that was one of the changes that was made. So they didn't use inconclusive as a conclusion back in 2015.
What was used? Was it everything?
An exclusion or an identification, and this is what other people would call inconclusive. We use different terminology. We will say exemplars poor or exemplars incomplete.
Which is basically unsuitable for examination.
Which is unsuitable for examination, or
right.
Or unable to do a full examination. You might have a palm print that's missing the entire center part. That's pretty common. That's an incomplete exemplar. I've got a palm print. I don't see it in the exemplar that I have, but I'm missing a huge chunk of the exemplar. We report that as exemplars incomplete. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of an inconclusive.
Okay, right, and I think Jill's question is helpful, right? There's a difference between not, at least thinking in the DNA context, but I think in the latent print, it's no value, right? Like, this thing is too smudged, we can't compare it to anything, right? Just, unfortunately, has no value to compare. But then there's, hey, we can go forward, the print is of value, we can compare it to a known, but geez, when we do that, we can't reach a conclusion. So I think you said it, but I didn't catch it. What back then was that category of cases where it is suitable to be compared, but you can't reach a definitive conclusion? what was that called, or did it not exist?
Either
Or?
exemplars incomplete or
Incomplete,
exemplars
okay.
poor.
Okay.
Either they felt like they could do a full comparison, so they would either exclude or identify, or they felt that they couldn't because of the quality of the exemplars.
Okay. And again, sorry if you just answered this, but so when those 400 plus cases were reviewed and you said the findings were concordant, were there instances of a difference between an incomplete and a actual conclusion?
Not to our knowledge, we don't, there was
Do you
nothing
know? I mean, if you
about
don't
that.
know,
No, we don't have any information concerning that.
Okay. I mean, the reason I'm asking these questions is obviously, you know, the defense bar is extremely concerned, and we as a commission should be very concerned about mistakes that were made, you know, prior to your tenure, but people are living with the consequences, right, of those mistakes. Fortunately, the individual in 2015 was not arrested due to a thorough investigation. That's good. But there, by the grace of God, go people without rock-solid alibis, right? That's a rare incident, and there have been some well-known, at least in the DNA context, that if you didn't have a rock-solid alibi, you could have been falsely inculpated, for sure. So my concern is, you know, in Chief Katranakis's root cause analysis, he identified causal factors that would have applied to more than just these three individuals. So it frightens me that there's this universe of cases out there that we don't know. We could have more of these 2015 situations, and we just don't know. I mean, I certainly understand maybe starting, right, with these three analysts. That makes sense. But what about going beyond?
So I agree with you, right? And you talk about this, that people with the rock solid integrity is the cornerstone of the NYPD. We agree wholeheartedly with you with the same thing that you just said. I think this investigation, what they went back and all the identifications that were made, proves that they did a good job. But also Jen makes mention that if Rex made an identification and we said that was good, we're also looking at the two examiners along with them that made verifications. So other people were, I'll call it, sampled with that they were sampled. So, you know, feel confident. And then going forward, post misidentification, what you said, we wanted to ensure, let's just give our due diligence, even though they're retrained and everything and there's new procedures set in place. I think the total number was 56. We wanted to make sure any guilty, you know, conviction or someone who took a plea, let's look at them again. Let's look at them again. And we did so, and everything concurred that they were proper identifications.
Yeah, I'm just worried, though, it's relying on the same system that failed, and is the root of this. So I do disagree with DA Fitzpatrick. Sorry, just one second. I do disagree with DA Fitzpatrick, as was stated in a letter that you were CC'd, the NYPD was CC'd on by the defense community. It was addressed to the district attorney's offices in the city of New York and the conviction integrity review units, but the NYPD was, of course, CC'd, and we had a series of questions, but we strongly called for an independent audit of the lab. So I do disagree with DA Fitzpatrick. I think it's necessary to do an independent look, and I would encourage the NYPD to retain independent experts, as was done in 2005, or as was done with Dr. Langenberg, and I think there was another, right, Kenneth Martin of Martin Forensics. Do you have the paperwork from his analysis? I understand he also agreed it was an exclusion, but do you have that? Can that be provided, or was there not a written report?
We have a summary.
We don't have that paperwork.
Okay.
We have a summary of those results.
Sure. It was, he agreed it was an exclusion. I have more comments, but I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I just think that we're the Commission on Forensic Science. We oversee public forensic accredited laboratories. It is not the job, in my opinion, and legal can kick me if they need to monitor the status of cases that go out the door. They report analytical results and they go out. At that point, does it not fall on the defense community and the district attorney's community to monitor and see if they have an issue? They have working groups. They have relationships with these people who now they can have communication about and we have concerns over this, or we're going to take a look at our cases and we would like you to look at the following. It's not the lab's job to do that. I'm sorry. It's not. They don't know outcomes of cases. I can tell you that from 25 years in the business. I don't often know what happens to a case that I've worked on. Like whether it goes to trial or not. Sometimes it goes to trial, I don't even get called to testify. So how am I to know? So from a laboratory perspective, which is, again, what the commission oversees, correct? We don't have jurisdiction to tell district attorneys and defense attorneys that they need to monitor what due diligence has been done on behalf of their clients.
I agree with you, Jill, but we have the obligation to be sure that the evidence that goes out of the labs is accurate as it is represented, because as I've said here before, when you get into that courtroom and you say this is scientific evidence, this is DNA, this is a fingerprint, that's all the jury needs to hear. I mean, that has such potency that to lay people when they hear that it's scientific evidence that's come out of a scientific lab. So I agree with you 100%. That's the job of the DA and the defense bar. But it's the job of the labs to make sure that what they're giving them is the best that they can produce and the safest results.
With a fingerprint, and that's why I'm thrilled that it is now an accredited science in New York. It's an opinion, unlike some other disciplines. To mark evidence on a shell casing, on a projectile, those are opinions. So this print at the scene has X number of common points with print from Guy and Creedmoor. The report indicated that this was a very unusual, I don't want to say 1 in a million cavalierly, but probably 1 in a million, if not 10 million, where there were a number of points of comparison. And it is almost an APHIS bias, because APHIS kept pumping out this Creedmoor guy's print. And that may have affected the results as well. So at some point, the quality assurance has to stop. If we bring in an outside agency, do we test them?
I don't disagree with you at all.
Yep.
I know the difference between absolute and opinion. You know the difference. But the jury doesn't know the difference. Even if you charge them 10 times and you explain what the difference is between what makes out an opinion, what's an absolute. Once a jury hears about forensic evidence, it's very, very potent evidence for the jury. I mean, how many times have you tried cases where you've gotten an acquittal and the jurors say to you, well, there were no fingerprints on the gun? You know and I know, and everybody else here knows, it's very hard to get a fingerprint off a gun, almost impossible. But, oh, there was no film of the robbery. There was no video. Nobody took a video. You get that all the time. But, I mean, I do agree with you, Jill. Our job ends at a certain point, and I agree with you. But we just have to make sure that what we're bringing to that point is the best that we can do.
Which I think is where we look at the time frame, right? And I bring us back to the time frame, and I bring us back to what they're saying and what they're doing with their stakeholders. And we have to have faith in the system to a certain degree now that, first of all, they did an excellent investigation back then, right?
Yep.
And then now also moving forward, the disclosure was made and they're still continuing to investigate it. So in my opinion, and what I was hearing was that I was like, I thought, and what I was hearing you say was that you were like, well, you need to look at all the cases and, you know, these outcomes. And it's like, well, they don't know the outcomes. You know, that again, that's where my.
Oh, I wasn't referring to, no, they need to ensure, what I'm saying is that there is reason to believe that the same causal factors that led to the misidentification in 2015 were lab-wide at the time. And it's good to hear that there are new policies and procedures that were implemented as a result of this that are designed to prevent this from happening. But we have an entire universe of cases, and it is their laboratory. I understand it's a new administration, and they are trying to do what they can to put this right. But what I am saying is that includes responsibility for casework that has come out of their lab that could mean that an innocent person is sitting in prison. They do have that responsibility. They do. This is forensic science. This is the application of science to law. And it has very grave consequences for people being prosecuted, also for victims, for the entire system. And it is their responsibility. And I'm not suggesting they're not taking it seriously, but I am questioning whether what is being done is enough.
And I have spoken, as I said earlier, to my 5 colleagues in the city. If there's any case that, I was a defense lawyer for 5 years. So
were you?
It doesn't show. So you get a client.
A little bit.
You get a client, and the lab tells you, hey, pal, your print is on this gun. Hey, Mr. Fitzpatrick, I was in Kansas City. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. Okay, so you hire an expert. You look at it. It's a human system. At some point, it stops. And we've done enough. I think this review by NYPD is nothing short of extraordinary. Their commitment to reviewing every case this guy touched. And my colleagues in New York have said, if any defense lawyer comes to us with a case involving these people and wants it re-reviewed, we'll do it. And I just think, Jessica, that at any point, are there innocent people in state prison in New York State today? Of course there are. Of course. Just statistically. And not just New York, in America. But at some point, they got to do their job. You can't have, I saw the letter that the defense bar said. I could be wrong. I would estimate, Brian, you tell me, I would estimate 10 scientists, 2 years to do what the defense lawyers request. Just off the top of my head. I could be wrong. It could be twice that. And what happens in the interim? You guys are getting budget cutted like everybody else in New York City. And what we don't talk about is, frankly, what I think is the biggest disgrace in fingerprint is the incompetence, not in the NYPD, but in people throughout the state who fail. We used to joke in Syracuse on homicide cases when I tried them in the 80s that, have you gotten the latest insufficient ridge detail for comparison report yet? Now we have, I think, one of the best professionals in the state doing fingerprints in Syracuse, and it's amazing how many prints suddenly we get in homicide cases. So I think the notion, the appeal to there may be one innocent person in prison is emotionally appealing and appalling to everybody in this room. I just exonerated a guy that spent 17 years in state prison on hair evidence that we now know is complete BS. I didn't have to do it. A woman came into court and identified him. I could have said to the court, hey, sorry, he did his time. The woman said it was him. That's good enough for me. I didn't do that. And I don't think I'm unique amongst 62 elected DAs.
I just want to add one thing, because this does seem to be a philosophical approach, not whether or not in the individual instance the NYPD process failed or what must happen after it, but just as a lab has an obligation to ensure that when you send it out, as you say, you trust your results, you believe in your results. There has to be an ongoing responsibility that when you become aware or have reason to believe that you've lost that trust, that the analysis can't just be in an isolated situation. It has to look systematically. And in an ideal world, you would review each of these, I think. I think we can all agree. And if you had the ability to do it without this manpower effort, without the resources that have to be exhausted, and you were a lab and you could bring yourself back in time to before it went out, and your SOPs weren't being followed to ensure reliability, you would say, no, don't send those out yet. We're going to reevaluate those before they go out. And I think that from the defense perspective, you want that because we all want accountability, right? We want to be sure. It can't be isolated to the situations where the defendant comes forward, because I hate to say it, but there's some counsel that are very strong on forensic evidence and there are others that are not. And the number of the counsel that are strong on it are very limited. So, and I think it's the lab's responsibility, our responsibility, the prosecutor's responsibility, the court's responsibility, the chemist's responsibility, the police responsibility to all work together to make sure that that is still trusted. And it seems like there's still a shadow of concern that it's not trusted.
I would also like to say that there is an evolution to a lab system, correct?
Yes.
And that what practices they had in the past versus now have changed significantly and been impacted based on legislative mandates, change of discovery, scientific advancements, everything, accreditation that has happened.
Hair follicle analysis.
You know, and so that's why I understand, but I also just want to make the point that to hold examinations to the level of an accredited laboratory now for examinations that have happened 15 years ago or however long ago, prior to, you know, research papers being done and all of these things need to be kept in mind. That's all. I think we muted Albany just for the simple fact that there was some feedback, but I do want to make sure that if there is any commentary or questions that need to come from Albany, that I'm giving you guys an opportunity.
Well, thank you.
All you.
I'm getting the all you. No, you're good? Okay. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the support. Yeah.
So you had mentioned stakeholder meetings. There's an ongoing conversation about the definition of customer, the definition of stakeholder. But since these are stakeholder meetings, obviously the defense and the clients we represent are stakeholders in the reliability of the work that your lab puts out. Will you meet with us, the defense bar?
Would I meet with the defense bar?
Yes. Will the lab meet with us over this issue?
I'll take it back to legal, and I'm sure we could.
And the district attorneys.
And the district attorney, sure.
Okay. Because when you use the word stakeholder, we are absolutely stakeholders in this process. You had mentioned that you are going through, with the help of the district attorney's office's transcripts of testimony at the last commission meeting. I had provided, or I had raised a couple. I had since provided them to other commission members. And I know that the district attorney's offices also have them. I provided them to them as well. Are you aware of any other instances of testimony by any of these three that they had never made a misidentification, they had never verified an identification that had later turned out to be false, that no misidentifications had been made, or any such misleading testimony? Are you aware of any other instances, and how many instances of testimony have you reviewed?
So the only two I know of is the two that were mentioned with detectives, strictly for Detective Rex.
Right.
And that's a concern. He's no longer an employee of the NYPD. If that was brought to light as it was, and he was still an employee, an official notification would have been made to Internal Affairs and the respective district attorney's office or Southern or Eastern District. Now that would be in the hands of the district attorneys now, or Eastern and Southern, for that investigation to occur. But I don't know of any other testimony as what you had brought up in the last meeting.
How many instances have you actually reviewed?
Those are the two.
10.
That's good.
Yeah.
My colleagues have told me that they are attempting to review every case that either one of these guys testified.
Right.
And they have, as we speak right here, they have transcripts. I don't know if they've been reviewed, but they are doing that.
Okay.
Probably some results certainly before the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I've received 10 transcripts from them, or a combination, we've been able to review 10, including the 2 that were brought up before. And then another 10 that were cases where a different examiner ended up testifying in a case that was one of theirs that they had been notified for.
So a total of 20?
A total of 20, but a total of 10 for the 2 detectives, Detectives Rex and Snevria.
And were you personally reviewed them?
I reviewed most of them. I didn't receive 100% of them from everybody, but the ones that I received, I looked at.
Are there instances of misleading testimony?
No. Those were the two that came from the Eastern District were really the only two.
Eastern, Southern, yeah.
Yeah, that even brought anything up regarding a misidentification that I could see.
Okay. How many more do you know the universe, or is that one of the question marks, is you don't know how much is out there?
We had found a total of, I think, I don't remember, maybe a total of 35 cases that they had been collectively notified for, sometime between 2015 and their retirement. And we were able to pare that down a lot because a lot of them was the same notification over and over for different cases, for the same case. You know, you get lots of notifications.
Sure, right.
And from that list, we found a total of 8 because the 2 federal cases were not on that list because we don't receive notifications from the federal cases through the court system, or we did not at that time, which is why those were not on our radar to begin with.
Do you agree that Detective Rex's testimony in those cases is problematic?
I think it's concerning.
Yeah.
Moving on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
And we know this will be to come on as you provide updates.
Yep.
It'll be on the agenda.
Just for the future, I don't know if this is a motion or something, a recommendation to my client, that every lab in the state keep a log of their experts and the subject matter. It's not, it's an quote-unquote unfunded mandate, but it's really not that onerous because labs are required to, observe testimony of their, because I'm having this issue in Syracuse with hair testimony. There's no database I can go to just to click in hair and have a bunch of cases pop out. But if in the future, 20 years from now, we get a situation like this occurs again, Jessica doesn't have to be asking all these questions. You'll get a list. Here are all the cases that so-and-so testified and the subject matter of his or her testimony. Just a thought.
It's a great idea.
It's absolutely great, but I'm going to tell you right now that we still have labs that don't have LIMS systems and use Excel spreadsheets or monitor chain of custody by paper and pencil. So I don't feel that we can make that ask.
Well, let me ask you this. What was the first reference to fingerprint in American literature?
Is this a quiz?
A novel. Anyone?
Oh,
Yes.
What was the question?
The first reference in a novel in American history to fingerprint
Guy from the
evidence.
Bronx.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Good guess.
No, but
Good
that
guess.
was
Mark Twain,
Ah,
The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson. Another example of the tragedy of the American educational system.
Fitz, seriously, you're killing me. All right. We look forward to more updates. Thank you so much for all the information you have provided. Okay, next up is New York City Police Department. Scott, you're just gonna hang out, okay? Informational purposes, no vote is required. The first issue is an initial notification of a seized drug performance monitoring test issue. An analyst assigned to reanalyze a case reported a substance that was not identified in the original report. Both analysts followed the laboratory procedure. The second issue involves a closeout of an issue with an unexpected result of a controlled substance proficiency test. The original notification was presented back in our September meeting. The laboratory has investigated the issue and attributed it to the management system. All analysts have successfully completed an additional performance monitoring test, and the laboratory considers the matter closed. Are there any questions? We do have Scott available in the hot seat, ready to go. Hearing none.
Wait.
Well,
yeah.
If you don't mind, I'll ask my colleagues to join me just in case I can answer the question. Thank you.
You're so close.
Yeah.
Power numbers.
Yes. I have Stephanie O'Shea, my quality assurance manager, and assistant director Nicole Capitale.
Good morning.
Of the Controlled Substance Analysis section.
So for the commission members, I'm looking at 179, 180. So I'm looking, Scott, at your November, or you were CC'd on November 21st email, if that's helpful. But so my understanding is there was a reanalysis according to your normal quality program. There's and maybe you can explain how that works, but right there's a random selection of, or is it maybe not random, selection of an analyst. And what happened is the original analyst and then the reanalyzing analyst reached different results on the same sample, and you were inquiring of ANAB, hey, does this have to be reported as a nonconformity, since both analysts, the original and the reanalyzing one, were following procedure.
Sure.
So I guess I have a few questions. One is, if they're both following procedure, how do they get a different result?
Sure.
You did explain it, but I don't follow it.
So-
So if you could, I guess, cover that.
I'm going to have Nicole explain the reason for the difference, but I'm just going to tell you the purpose of the email. So the purpose of the email was that ANAB recently put out a heads-up letter explaining this concept of unexpected results for proficiency tests, where they would expect a level of notification. For me as the laboratory director, we had a conversation with them to understand, this is something they expect us to report to them. Hopefully Nicole will explain why the reason that we see this as a successful PT, why you could get different results from different examiners based upon the evidence and based upon certain circumstances. And we do have others that we're reporting, but it was late for the commission meeting. But the point being is that this is something that we think is reasonable, that things are going to happen where one analyst will do one test and follow a set of procedures, and then they may follow a different set of procedures because we allow that in our policy. So I'm going to let Nicole, if you don't mind, discuss why there's a difference.
Can I just, it's also, we were asking if we should report it as unexpected results, not a nonconformance.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So the original analyst identified 3 controlled substances. There was a 4th controlled substance, cocaine in this case, which they saw indications of. They had some ions present for it, not a full, complete spectrum, but it was buried also in the peak of a sugar. So it was co-eluting. So they noted, yes, there might be cocaine there, but I can't identify it because it's co-eluting. I can't separate it as part of the requirement for it. The reanalysis analyst used a different instrument, basically, and I'll explain a little bit about why that was impactful, where the co-elution didn't occur. The cocaine actually separated from the sugar. What it's probably attributed to is the fact that for general gas chromatography maintenance, there's a column inside of it that they all start at a certain length for us for this one method. We have to trim pieces off of it every so often to make sure that separation is good, that peak shape is good, but that does affect sometimes the separation for compounds that come out sometimes closer together. So the original analyst was on an instrument that we can see from our logs definitely had more trimmings done to it. The reanalysis analyst was on an instrument that had a newer column inside of it. So was able to get that separation.
Can I ask a question? Are you monitoring the peak shapes coming back to baseline to determine when you need to either swap out the column or, as you say, trim it? And then did that happen in that procedure where it was first co-eluting?
So we wouldn't base it on the results of that testing for that case. There are a series of standards that are run in the morning on all of the instruments. It's the same solution that's run, and we are looking for peak shape and separation in those cases. It wouldn't necessarily have indicated this would have been a factor for this analyst.
Nicole, what's the time frame difference between the original analysis and the second? Well, they're on different instruments anyways.
They were on different instruments, but
how often do you guys end up changing your column? Is it
really,
as needed?
It really depends, and it's as needed. But some instruments are definitely used probably a little bit more often than others, or for different compounds or a specific type of compound. So I can't really say that there's a general. Every 2 weeks it's clipped. It's not like that. It's as we see indications that maintenance is is necessary.
Just to give you a perspective as well, like the controlled substance analysis section of many forensic laboratories may have 1 to 3 instruments. We have 35. You know, we're a very large laboratory, lots of equipment, lots of instruments. So we have quality control checks to ensure they're working at a certain level, but there are inherent differences based upon, you know, with different examiners. Most drug laboratories have 3 or 4 examiners. We've authorized over 140. So there is a difference in approach in regards to the casework when they go to one particular instrument over another.
And each column is going to react differently and going to have different.
It's the same.
stationary
It's the
phase.
same call. No, it's the same stationary phase, but it has a certain length. But that length says.
I mean, machine to machine.
It's a 15 meter
15 meter column.
I mean, each of your machines is going to have a different column, which is going to have a different station.
Yes, different column.
Different retention times for different compounds.
Well, no, they all have this, most of them, they have the same column, which starts out at the same length, it has the same stationary phase. But what I was explaining is, they all start at 15 meters for our most common methods, but we trim off and, you know, a few centimeters at a time every time we do maintenance up to a certain point, and then once we see that we're actually not getting the separation, the column will be swapped out. So one instrument might have a full 15 meter column because it was just installed, and the instrument next to it might have, you know, 14.89 meter column because we've trimmed a portion of it off. And that does slightly shift how long it takes compounds to come out of the column.
So the maintenance is as needed for each independent instrument, so they would each, they're slightly different.
And we run, because of that, we run standards of controlled substance
every run?
on every instrument.
Every run?
Every morning.
Every run. Okay.
Every morning. So that retention time may be 2.1 minute on this one, but 2.3 minute on that one. So that's why we do that also.
Yeah. I understand. Thank you.
I have one question. Just for clarification, the original analyst did note indications of the substance, but it wasn't reportable. It was in their notes.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Was cocaethylene found in it, in the one where they couldn't identify for sure the cocaine? Do you know?
What's that? Sorry.
The byproduct of cocaine. A benzoglycecane.
No.
I don't believe there was a peak of benzoylectinine in there, no.
That's not something we normally see. I think it's more from toxicology work. You'd see benzoylectinine.
Yeah, right.
But we just analyse powders.
I understand.
Solid material, not biological.
I understand.
I don't think a lot of forensic labs look at the byproducts.
We do. I didn't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. A lot of the forensic labs don't look at the byproducts. That's generally done at the toxicology level.
Thank you. We'll move on to the New York State DCJS latent fit laboratory. For informational purposes, no vote is required. This is an initial notification and closure of an issue regarding a missing report statement. The laboratory investigated the issue and reviewed case reports from the last year for the analyst, and one additional case was found to be missing that report statement. Amended reports were issued in both cases. Are there any questions for the lab?
Yes.
We have folks present in Albany. If they could step to the table. And unmute Albany. We have the lab director, Andrea Lester, and Albany Manager, Jennifer Alois. Go ahead, Jessica.
Good morning. Good morning. I wanted to make sure I understood the nature of the nonconformance, so let me know if I've got this right. A customer or an investigator called the lab and wanted a comparison done between a person and a piece of evidence. So the analyst checked the case and found that comparison had actually already been done, and there was an exclusion. That person of interest was excluded. It just was missing that language, that result in the final report. Is that right?
So they wanted, they had another suspect. We had put it out as a excluded to elimination prints they had already originally sent in. So we had from a different person. So we had forgotten, the analyst had forgotten to put that exclusion statement in there saying that elimination prints that they had originally sent in in the report. And we had found that when they had called in on another person of interest, they wanted us to compare those latent prints against.
So the initial report,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, the
And
initial-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
that's okay, I just want to make sure there's further clarification. The initial report, there was a person of interest that was submitted with the case, with the evidence. The evidence was examined. There was no identification made on that evidence. The analyst did not also indicate with that initial person of interest that they were eliminated as being contributor to that latent print. So the report was issued, then follow-up from the investigators where they found another person of interest, issued that information to the laboratory, and that was then when we realized that the first person of interest was not included on the report, but two different persons of interest.
And as part of your remedial action, you looked at other reports. Was it just from that particular analyst, or did you do a sampling of the lab as a whole?
We only looked at the reports by that analyst for the year.
And why did you only look at that analyst?
At this point in time, that is our course of business. If we feel that it was something that was an issue throughout the laboratory, and then we would have gone to that degree, but with this instance, we just kept it at the analyst.
You didn't think it was necessary to go further?
At that time, no.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you. We'll move on to the New York State Police Crime Laboratory. For informational purposes, no vote is required. The first set of documents that we received is the closure of an issue with a CODIS notification letter that was sent to submitting agency and district attorney's office with an incorrect name. The original notification was presented at the September commission meeting. The lab has conducted a root cause analysis and implemented corrective actions, and the lab considers this matter to be closed. The second set of documents were received as an initial notification of an analyst making an incorrect entry into the integrated ballistic imaging system. The entry was corrected, and as a result, an additional 5 unconfirmed NIBIN leads were issued. The report was issued to the district attorney and affected agencies that were notified. About 2,700 NIBIN cases were then reviewed with no additional data entry errors. The lab is currently conducting a root cause analysis and will provide updates when available. Do we have any questions for the State Police Lab? We have someone available in Albany.
Yes.
If we could get the State Police folks to step to the table.
Good morning.
Good morning.
By way of an introduction, I'm Ray Wickenheiser. I'm the lab director, and this is Brad Brown, who is the associate director over physical evidence, which includes firearms section.
Morning.
Morning. First, a question about the CODIS nonconformance closeout. I believe you identified as one of the factors in the erroneous disclosure or the disclosing the wrong name on a CODIS notification, increased workload in the CODIS unit. What's causing the additional workload? Are you losing staff, or what is the reason for the additional workload in CODIS unit?
So a couple reasons. One is certainly just the increase in the number of associations that are made. That's the natural growth of the database, both on the size of the database and the number of forensic samples. So just more work. One supervisor or one individual has been promoted to supervisor. So certainly that's to me just a natural progression. So there have been people promoted in training and whatnot. It's just a very busy section.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to hire more people, or?
Yes, we do have additional positions that are going into place. Of course, that takes time to get the positions recruit and hire, but that is on the way.
Did you say the difference between NIBIN and IBIS?
whispered that to her. That you,
Yeah, I have the
don't wanna
same
make
question.
myself a
Ask the
fool in front
question.
of the
So
No,
judge.
I have the
no,
same
IBIS
question. I'll ask.
IBIS is like crash tracks. That's the initial entry point for the casing, right? And then that is searched against the database as a whole, which is NIBIN. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just channeling my old firearms days.
No questions are foolish.
If Jessica asked a question, I would say, you don't know the difference.
Call me an ABA. I don't even know what the defense attorney was. Anyway, are there any other questions?
I thought so. Yes. So this one is about the NIBIN disclosure. I just had a question. In your letter dated November 29th, you indicated that as of November 29, 2023, 2,700 NIBIN cases have been reviewed and no additional data entry errors identified. I'm just curious about that review process. That's a huge number. How was that reviewed? How long did it take?
That's a fair question.
Number to review.
All right, sorry to interrupt you. That's a fair question. With the advent of the discovery law, we now scan every firearms case to a server, so they're readily accessible. So, and I have 3 forensic scientists working about 50% of the time conducting those reviews. And as of, to give you an update, as of yesterday at 3 p.m., we've reviewed 3,883 cases, 4,973 individual acquisitions, and we did find 3 additional errors which resulted in no leads from 2020.
So if I could just add to what Brad is saying, we did have a nonconformity on a class entry error sometime previously. We added a corrective action to address that, had a look at the analyst who made that error and found no entries. That's where we closed that out. This particular issue happened before we added that corrective action. So now we're undertaking an extensive review of every single analyst of every case we have access to.
We have approximately 1,200 more cases to review, which will cover the 4 years of 2020 through this year to date.
Wow. And how does the review work? If you could just summarize, what is I understand you have a lot of analysts working on this. What are they actually doing to check the work?
They're looking at all of the data transfers, and this is a risk in NIBIN, at least in our system. There's a tremendous number of data transfers between the submission form and IBIS, the submission form and the notes, IBIS to the notes to the reports, and they're checking everything extremely thoroughly. They're bringing me back things that have been corrected, during the review process, so there are no errors going out in the case. They're just pulling these scans up, and in some cases, they're going to the file room, pulling up the cross-reference cases, or going into the system, the IBIS system, and looking at the images. So they're doing a very thorough review. Because of this past quality event, frankly, we don't want to be coming back with something that happened earlier and reporting it again. So we're trying to cover as many cases as we can find. So.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else?
I have one quick one. This is Mike Marciano. So you're saying that these could be the result of the number of data transfers that have to occur?
Well, the original analyst has to make the data transfers and check their own work. And then the tech reviewer has to check all of these data transfers. I typically do the administrative reviews. I check the areas where we see our vulnerabilities, like the caliber, the firing pin impression shape. And once in a while, there's an error rate to everything, things slip through. So because of this, we recently held a data transfer mandatory training for the section where we tried to cover everything that everyone should be looking at on these reviews.
So if I could just add, when you look at the total error rate, and again, we want our error rate to be 0, on a case basis, that is 3 errors in almost 4,000 cases, so less than 0.1%. There's a lot of data that has to be transferred in every single case. I mean, you're really talking about entering all of these class characteristics, but if you don't have the class characteristics correct, you're not going to get the right search and kniving, you're going to mislead. So we're really going through it thoroughly. 0.1% error rate is pretty low considering each case has a lot of entries in it. We really want to make sure that we're not missing anything, but it really is a human factor when you're making that many entries and having the transcribed data, and that's just the way, unfortunately, the system works.
Absolutely. Thanks. And the review process seems very, very thorough.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the Suffolk County Office of Chief Medical Examiner Toxicology Lab for informational purposes. No vote is required. The first issue is an initial notification and a closure of an issue where an overestimated measurement uncertainty range was reported due to an incorrect value in the LIMS system. The laboratory has corrected the LIMS system, issued amended reports, and notified the district attorney's office. They've also updated their procedures to include the verification of the LIMS entry and director approval. The second issue is with the initial notification and closeout of an issue where a not detected report was amended after additional testing. The laboratory evaluated its limit of detection capability. Do you have any questions for the lab? We have some folks available virtually.
May I?
Yes. Okay,
Thank you.
so if we could bring the Suffolk County folks on, right? Is that where we are?
Suffolk County.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Toxicology.
We should have Mike and Ed.
Claire, whenever you are ready, you can unmute yourself and turn on your video.
Mike, can you unmute and hear us? Mike, we can see you up, but we just need you to unmute yourself. Try spacebar. Try. I'm trying to think of all the things. Catherine, can you see? Is he call-in or is he computer?
He is computer.
Okay, so you should be able to just whack the spacebar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Catherine, can you elevate Inga? They're all together.
Oh, okay.
Inga, you are up as well.
We don't see Inga on our end, but that doesn't mean anything. If she unmutes and starts talking, we should be able to see and hear her. Or we can send a carrier pigeon. That would work too. I don't know at this point.
For a good old-fashioned phone call.
Call her the day.
Yeah.
Ask my daughter that all the time.
Shelley, any update on their end?
I'll send them the phone number when I can. Maybe they can call.
All right.
Inga, we were able to see you. Can you hear us?
It says they're unmuted.
We can't see Inga on our screen at all, but that could be because we've got so many boxes going. But again, if she just speaks, then she should be the main window. So. Oh, there we go. Now we just need to hear them. Do you want to try turning up the volume on them and see? I don't know. Albany, can you mute real quick for us? Right, now give it up. Inga, can you say something? All right, here's what we're gonna do. We'll send the phone number for call-in. So you can just call in to the meeting and then we'll come back to you. Catherine, just let me know when they've called in. Otherwise, just, you can move them down and we'll move on to the next agenda item and come back.
Somebody said something that was.
All right, so we'll move on to the Westchester County Department of Labs and Research Division of Forensic Toxicology. For informational purposes, no vote is required. The first set of documents is the initial notification of an unexpected proficiency test result. The laboratory has investigated the issue and determined it to be a sample matrix issue. They reviewed acetone positive cases from June 2023 through October 10th, 2023 and determined that no other cases were impacted. The second set of documents is the initial notification and closeout of a standard operating procedure deviation. Information was missing from the GCMS acquisition methods for opioids. The issue was resolved and no cases were impacted. The laboratory will institute an annual review of all instrument methods to ensure they conform with the SOP, and ANAB has acknowledged the receipt of this disclosure. Do we have any questions for the Westchester County Tox Lab? All right, I'm gonna do a brief check-in with Catherine. Did they possibly call in by now?
Not yet.
Okay, then we'll move right along and we'll come back to them. Keep it moving. Suffolk County Crime Lab's up next. For informational purposes, no vote is required. This is an initial notification of a missing item of evidence. Upon repackaging of evidence for court displays, an item was not found in its original container. The laboratory is investigating and performing a root cause analysis. There will be updates to come from the lab once they have concluded that. Again, because this is just an initial notification. Are there any questions for the lab? We do have someone available virtually, I believe.
They're in the same room that we're having trouble with. They're all together.
Happens all the time. They use the evidence.
Oh, all right. Well, maybe there's no questions. So, any questions?
What do you mean by no?
All righty. Moving on, New York City Office
Jill?
Chief Medical Exam Department.
We
of
do have a
Forensic-
call-in.
Okay, let's see. Is it Mike and Inga?
Tyler, go ahead and unmute yourself.
There we go. Inga, can you hear us? You are unmuted. We see you up there, but we need you to talk. The technology gremlins are against us, I guess. I'm not quite sure what to do on this one.
Am I that scary?
I do see your hand raised.
Welcome to the commission, sir. You have scared them so much they can't even speak. This is not the relationship we want to be having.
Well, you have a couple options. You can go and come back.
We're gonna go and come back.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Oh,
It's a lot of feedback.
we're hearing lots of feedback.
Separation.
Try and talk again. Okay, moving on. We'll come back. Let me know when they can talk and we can hear. We'll have fun. All right, where was I? Where am I going?
New York.
Can you hear? Yes, we can hear you.
Way past Westchester.
Go ahead.
Still, can you hear?
Horrible feedback. I can't hear anything. All right.
They have to mute their PC.
Okay, this is Ed Minden from Suffolk Tox.
Okay, everybody else needs to mute, and then we can listen to Ed. Go ahead, Ed.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't hear.
We'll need a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. This is Stephen Epstein. I have some questions about the DUID urine analysis that was redone for examination of alprozapam. First question is, I don't see in the materials, what was the initial method? I know the secondary analysis was LCMS. What was the initial analysis done by? What technique?
It was the same type of analysis. It was they were both done on LCMS triple quads, but they were different panels.
Okay, and the underlying report in these cases is not quantification, just qualified analysis, right? That the substance is there. So you're just reporting
just the presence,
out
yes.
And what are do you have standard operating procedures for the cutoffs on that particular drug?
We have limits of detection.
Right. The first analysis, it was below the limit of detection.
It didn't pass qualifying to be reported at the limit of detection the first time.
So it was below the level of detection?
Well, it didn't pass the criteria for detection, yes.
And the SOPs of the lab in that situation is not to report it back or do secondary testing.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Your SOPs on that are to not do any secondary testing and not report anything back.
Correct.
Right, that was the initial. So what I'm confused about is the secondary test was it the result due to your vendor, the police officer, and then it was rerun and reported back. Isn't that report back now contrary to your standard operating procedures? Aren't you in essence modifying your SOPs for a vendor for the police officer?
It was an additional test requested for other compounds that we do not routinely test for. So because it was reported not detected, he requested additional analysis for these other compounds. And as it is set up, that compound of alprazolam is a marker for a control in the secondary analysis.
So you had no known standards for alprozapam on your first LCMS. You weren't looking for it. It wasn't a target compound. It wasn't.
No, we were looking for it in the original one. Yes.
That's my question, and maybe I'm just confused. Maybe it's me. I apologize. If the initial test reports back no alprazolam, you're now having an outside party outside your lab ask you to do another test, and it seems that that's contrary to your SOPs. Am I wrong? Am I missing something?
Well, it's not contrary to the SOPs. We have the availability to do that secondary analysis for other compounds. If it was for a compound that was not like alprazolam, which is in our control markers, we wouldn't have been looking for that compound again. It just happens to be that alprazolam is one of our 9 or 10 control compounds that is in every analysis that we do.
And that's the reason for the issue here?
Yes.
Well, thank you. I just have one other question. Did you have any concern at that point for context bias, since you were looking for something specific that was asked by law enforcement? And was anything done to account for that? Maybe a double-blind analysis by another examiner or anything else?
I'm sorry, you broke up a lot there.
So was there any concern at the lab at that point for context bias? Was there another examiner that was double blind, that didn't know what they were looking for, or did you do anything to minimize the risk of context bias in that situation?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't really make out the question.
Let me go back a step. I think part of the concern is it's a DUI drugs case and there's no per se limit in New York State. So presence of a sample where there's no quantified levels can have significant impact, especially at very, very, very low levels. There's no per se drug case in New York. So my question is, was anything done at that secondary step to ensure that there was no context bias? You have an officer who's telling you, maybe he's DRE, maybe he's not. I'm seeing signs of controlled substance. Are you sure? And so I'm concerned about the context analysis now of a lab looking for what the police officer is telling you is there. That's not a common. So, and now you're doing it in all your cases with negative findings where you're actually looking for what the officer is saying is detected. It just seems.
No, I understand what you're saying. This was a request from the district attorney's office. They asked us to do a supplemental analysis, and it wasn't specifically looking for alprazolam, so it was looking for anything that could also be present. They could have requested us to send it out too, but this is what the analysis we had possible availability to them, and that's what they asked us to do.
And do you do the same reanalysis, this last question, on defense request? So defendant says they didn't do the drug comes back positive. Defendant reaches out to your lab directly, not through the prosecutor, wants that re-examination done. Do you do that in that circumstance?
I'm sorry, again, you broke up.
Do you do the same retesting at the request of a defense attorney? Not that.
Yes, if we were asked to do retest for something, yes, we would.
Okay.
And we have.
Thank you so much.
As per your request.
Thank you.
I think that's it in terms of questions. Thank you so much for being resilient, Shelley, and calling on your cell phone and putting him on speakerphone and holding it up to the microphone, because that's where we're at in 2023.
We also have Suffolk Forensic Lab on here now too, and somebody had a question for them, I believe.
Did anyone have a question regarding the Suffolk County Crime Lab? That was the missing evidence initial disclosure. And the investigation's continuing. They're performing a root cause analysis, and there will be more to come in the next meeting. Was there a question?
Can I just ask something? Sure. Just for clarification from them, was the item not opened prior to the repackaging for court? Has it never been opened since the initial submission into the lab?
Correct. Good morning. Yes, this was sealed at the crime scene, and that it was never reanalyzed again.
Okay, thanks.
Now I believe we are done. Technology at its finest. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suffolk. I'm going to hang up.
Thank you.
Man, I got some gray hairs on that one. Sheesh. All right, New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner, Department of Forensic Biology. This is for informational purposes and no vote is required. The first item is a follow-up to a notification that was made at our September commission meeting regarding an unidentified human remains rank and CODIS. The laboratory conducted a retrospective quality review and did not find any additional issues. The next, the second item is a disclosure. We will navigate this one delicately as to the underlying situation, as to how they found it, as it is an item that we will discuss further in executive session. But an issue was identified in work which was being reviewed by an author or co-author of the report. The affected cases will be assigned to a new analyst and new reports will be issued. The laboratory is still investigating the issue and working to determine if there are additional cases that will that may have been affected, and ANAB has acknowledged the receipt of that disclosure. Do we have any questions for the lab on either of those items?
Yes.
We have members present here in New York City. If you could step to the table. Morning. Good morning again. Again, I just want to say that we will navigate this delicately, as there is information that is relevant to executive session specifically. So please keep that in mind when you are asking questions.
I guess my first question is if you could explain the disclosure and the significance as to casework and what you're doing about it. My understanding is that a technical reviewer in the lab was actually doing the job of a case analyst. Then a case analyst was signing the reports, even though they had not done the work. And then that same technical reviewer was then technically reviewing essentially his own work. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And could you explain how that came and when that came to your attention?
Well, because we had been looking back at cases that were open, that were related to that technical reviewer, we were asked to do some additional technical reviews of work he was involved in. So through that process, one of the cases that was re-technically reviewed, it was identified that he actually ran the star mix, which is actually okay if someone runs the star mix, but then it was looked into further and it was identified through our LIMS system, through the LIMS audit trail, that he had actually written the case report and done all of the activity in the case. And the activity of the analyst who signed the report was only performing the e-signature to put their signature on the report. And then that case was technically reviewed by the same initial analyst. So this was found during this technical review process, which pushed us into a full investigation, which had involved this technical reviewer and 2 additional people who we were already doing re-technical reviews on their work as well. So we basically did an 100% LIMS audit trail screening of all the cases where the supervisor did the technical review and these 2 analysts signed the report to see who actually did the work. We also expanded that review into direct reports to this supervisor. So all 100% of their cases that this person had technically reviewed. There were other colleagues of his who he had mentored very closely. So we looked at 100% of their cases that he had technically reviewed. And then we also did a 10% screening of everyone else who he had ever technically reviewed their work that was in LIMS. And out of all of that screening, we identified 31 cases. And they were limited to those same first 2 individuals that we already were re-technically reviewing some of their work.
And sorry, when was this that you started investigating this technical reviewer?
I think it would become clear in executive session, if we may.
I don't see why the date would have to be an executive session. I'm just asking for a time period.
The time period that this issue was identified was on November 20th.
When you detected that the technical reviewer ran star mix and then started signing reports that he didn't actually do?
Yes.
Okay. And as a result, you're saying, I just want to be clear that you have checked. First of all, what's the universe of cases where this particular technical reviewer has performed a technical review? How many cases is that?
Performed technical reviews, thousands of cases. The cases that we have screened have been 1,200 cases.
Okay, 1,200 out of what, though? I guess that's what I'm...
I don't have the total number of all of the technical reviews they performed. It's approximately 2,600.
2,600. And why did you pick the 1,200 out of the 2,600? You may have already answered that, but if you could explain.
We isolated it to 2 particular individuals who, as I said, we were technically reviewing some of their work, as well as close associates of this person, with the logic, kind of a focused logic that perhaps this process was to help these people do their work for them. So that's why we focused 100% of those individuals. But then we thought, we need to check everyone. So everyone, any work that this person did reviewing other people. So we did a 10% screening of those individuals. Since that screening did not identify any inappropriate procedures in terms of writing and technical review, that's where we ended the LIMS audit trail screening related to this technical reviewer.
Okay. And sorry, just walk me real slow through this. So the 10% is of if the total is 2,600, and correct me if I'm getting the math wrong, if the total is 2,600 and 1,200 or thereabouts, you did a review because it involved this tech reviewer and these two analysts. The 10% is of the remaining number, if that made any sense at all. What 10% of what? Let me just ask it that way.
It did make sense to me. But
Okay.
To explain
Probably
for
nobody
others,
else. At least to you.
10%,
Okay.
2,600 minus the 1,200 equals 1,400, 10% of that, approximately 140 cases. Don't let me speak on math. Math is not my mathing.
I'm in a
not
room
sure.
with scientists.
And
This
it
is
was
great.
actually
Okay.
higher. It was actually higher. It was like 251 cases actually that were looked at for that. This was unique to this individual, which we believe that, this issue with this supervisor, we've identified the problematic cases. So if within the 10% we found other issues, we would have done 100%. I should indicate that we are, yes, this happened with this individual, and we are addressing that because of this individual who is suspended from the lab as of right now. But we are working on a query to look at the entire LIMS system, to evaluate all technical reviewers and basically all cases to make sure that the technical reviewer was not the one who did the work. So that is something that is a pretty complicated process to work out these queries, and then it needs to be QC'd, like that the query actually works, and then we have to run the query for every single technical reviewer, which will then encompass all the cases in LIMS. So that is something that is ongoing.
Okay. And how did you select the 10% that you did? How did you sample that?
I believe it was just a random sampling. All the cases were listed in a spreadsheet, and perhaps Craig did it for us. He could explain how he randomly chose the 10% of the cases.
Hi, Craig O'Connor, Deputy Director. I actually took all of the analysts that he had done tech reviews on and did 10% of those, but ensured that every single analyst had at least one that we were looking at. So there are some analysts that he may have tech reviewed 20 cases from, where another analyst only 2 cases. I ensured that each analyst that he had performed technical review, we had gotten at least one. That's why it's a little higher than 10%.
I see. Okay. Okay. And you're expanding the search beyond, so are you using an in-house person to design this? What, it's just a code to be able to search your LIMS system efficiently?
Yes, it's correct. We're using staff to help us write the query, the database query.
Okay. And what is the exact target of that query? Is it just to see if the same tech reviewer did the actual underlying work of the case analyst, or is it something else as well?
It's essentially that, yes.
Is it anything else?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Is your investigation into this issue focused on anything besides this technical reviewer doing the work of a case analyst and then the case analyst falsely claiming that it was their work? Are there other issues you're concerned about?
No, this is the purpose of this query, is to look at, we know who the technical reviewer was, and we want to see who did the work in the case, who signed up on the case.
What about the, right, the concern is if this tech reviewer and these analysts are lying, right? I think we'd all agree they're all lying, right, about what they did. Are they lying about other things related to their work? And what are you doing to check that?
Well, part of just starting back to the cases we identified, those 31 cases have been reassigned to other analysts. The analysts have written the cases, and they're basically, probably when I get back to the lab, they're all going to have been issued to our customers. We have not found any technical issues in the cases that would make us concerned about technical content of the cases. things that I've also looked into, we did look at the testimonies that the analysts have done, at least that we have logged into our LIMS system. It's a self-proclaimed, I went to court, I did it on this case. So I looked at all of those for this technical reviewer, as well as the two individuals initially included in this situation. And I did the LIMS audit trail for all of those cases to ensure that those cases were done appropriately. So at least in terms of testimony, they could say effectively that it could be, I couldn't detect anything that they would be lying about, because they either did the work and they signed the report, or they performed the technical review, and I was able to identify that.
Have you sorry, go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, have you provided notice to the prosecutors in those cases where they've given testimony? Because, I mean, there's one way of looking at it, which is you look at it and from your point of view, there's no direct nexus between the result of the test but there's a credibility issue, right? So prosecutor would have to notify defense counsel of favorable information.
Yes, I have provided the list of testimonies that we have, and they have the prosecutors have the list of all the cases that these analysts have worked on, not just technical review, like any cases that they worked on as report writers and technical reviewers.
That was actually one of my questions, is the tech reviewer, is he also performing the role of, does he do his own cases?
He has in the past, and he can. A technical reviewer can still perform case writing. So yes, all of that information is provided to the ADAs.
Okay. Are you checking his work as a case analyst as well?
It was included in all of this work, yes.
When you say for those, and correct me again if I'm wrong, it's 33 cases that you have assigned to new analysts, new reporting analysts, and new tech reviewers. Is that right?
I believe so.
It's 31 now.
It's actually 31. The 33, there are some duplicates on the list because some cases had 2 reports, but only one of the 2 reports were affected by this. So there's actually 31 cases and 31 case reports.
What are those analysts actually doing? What is the case? Are you re-extracting? Are you recutting the swab, re-extracting? Are you going from the extraction stage on up through testing? Is the sample getting retesting, or is someone just looking at a paper file and going through it to say, yeah, I agree? Like, what is the actual process?
The process is starting from reviewing the notes from the evidence exam of the items, which is most of the time not performed by anybody who wrote the report. So the new analyst is looking at the evidence exam notes, all of the batches that have gone through all the extraction procedures, the quantitations, and then following that, and then looking at all the STR data that came out, assessing the edits in the STRs, and then essentially doing a new interpretation. So they're determining how many number of contributors, they're running star mix, and then they're writing a report.
But they're rerunning star mix?
Yes.
Okay. Are they re-editing on the electronic raw data, or?
If they see the need to, yes.
Okay. And then you have a new technical reviewer who's taking it soup to nuts, the standard tech review process?
Yes.
Afresh. Okay. How many times, and I apologize if you had said this, did this tech reviewer at issue testify? Did you say that number?
The ones that are logged into our LIMS, it was 89 times.
89 times, okay. And that entire list has been given to the district attorney's office, you said?
Yes.
Okay. So when I talk about the substance of the work itself, the scientific results, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there are some steps in testing in the lab that aren't witnessed and aren't recorded, right? Like just serology is an obvious example, and I know your serology workflow or procedures have totally changed recently. But I think at least during some of the relevant time period, right, you were using Seratech cartridges for PSA, Kastle-Meyer, I think you still do that, right? And then whatever amylase testing. And if I recall, please correct me, but the Seratech cartridges were thrown away after they were used. There was no photographic evidence and there was not a witness at that step. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So, and I imagine there are other steps in the process, like maybe witnessing two locations in your batch testing. Is any effort being made to, because right, if we're worried about these three analysts lying and there's steps that don't have some sort of other check ingrained in them, are you going back to check to make sure they did, like say for instance, one of these three ran a PSA test, but there's not going to be evidence under your protocols of the results. How do we know they actually did it? My point is, and I'm using this as an example, I'm concerned about other problems in the testing. And how do you, I mean, it's a hard problem, but how do you check this? How do you deal with this?
Issue with the technical, they looked into it and they didn't find any issue at the technical level.
Those were different analysts.
Meredith Rosenberg, Deputy Director,
Hi.
also for FIO. I would say that, yes, there may not be anyone who's present when the analyst is performing the serotech testing. However, there is an analyst the case is passed to, and the results of testing at examination has to make sense to the downstream testing. And if it didn't, the person who's handling the case would make note of that. We haven't seen any instances in any of the 31 cases or any other cases so far where we would question the work that was done at the bench of these particular analysts.
But sure, and I think we all agree that there's some instances where that's pretty obvious, I guess. But there are other instances where that wouldn't be clear, right? Like you could get a PSA, you could claim falsely you got a PSA positive result on a stain, and then you could get a male DNA profile, but it wasn't from semen, right? And even though PSA isn't a confirmatory test, it would still be reported as presumptively positive. So I understand what you're saying, like there is some checking there, but it's certainly not foolproof, right? So I'm just worried there are errors by dishonest analysts, and although you have a quality system, without additional in-depth checking or even retesting, you're not gonna uncover them. Do you understand what I'm saying with the PSA example?
Understood.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, we could take it under advisement, but it would be a difficult, undertaking, but we could definitely take it under advisement.
Yeah. Right, because you'd have to literally go back to the swab or the whatever sample and retest it for
Well, we would
PSA.
first look to see do the results make sense to the testing that was performed.
Sure. You can get male DNA from things other than semen, so it might be a difficult thing just to use the presence of a male DNA profile to confirm a positive, right? In that one example, and there may be others, it's just really concerning, and it is good to see that, it appears you are taking this very seriously, and in doing an extensive review, but I'm concerned about the need for a more in-depth look at the scientific accuracy of these results. And also, I guess the obvious question, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're headed in that direction, is how do we know it's just these three, right? Is this a more systemic problem in the lab? Is this affecting anybody else in the laboratory? And is that why you're designing this query, to try to expand and see and uncover?
We have that question too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What do you, and maybe it's too early to tell, but what do you think is the cause of this?
I think it would be, Martha Sabi, I'm the general counsel. I think it would be premature to speculate. I think right now we want to ensure the integrity of the work. Certainly we don't want to besmirch the hard work of the other analysts. But certainly we're undertaking the steps at this point to make sure that we can have more assurance, obviously. So we don't want to speculate on that.
On the root cause yet? You haven't determined it?
We have not determined.
Okay. And I'll say with prior disclosures at the OCME that affects casework, the OCME has actually met with the defense bar. I remember Dr. O'Connor actually did a presentation on one of the disclosures having to do with StarMix that was very helpful in understanding. And I'll say the LIMS system is, which we now get through discovery, it isn't the most transparent thing to try to understand. If you're not using it in a laboratory setting, maybe even it's hard for people in the lab to understand it. But is that something the lab would consider as meeting with the defense bar as you have in the past?
I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. I mean, let's be clear that your request is coming from your own private.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
not from the commission. So
No,
it would
absolutely.
probably make sense if you guys were like probably speak offline with each other.
Okay, but it's also a matter for the commission is whether the lab is, properly communicating with the stakeholders, of which the defense is one.
Well, let's
right?
make a differentiation between stakeholders and customers, which is something that we
Sure,
do.
we are a
Accreditation
stakeholder.
purposes speaks of customers.
Okay.
Does not speak of stakeholders.
Okay,
The
so
laboratory undertakes what additional they would like to involve stakeholders with at their discretion.
Great.
Customer is who
In your
requests the
discretion, will you
analysis.
meet with the defense as stakeholders?
Offline, I think
Offline,
you can ask that
I
question.
mean, if the
We can
commission,
discuss that
wants to meet, it's not ridiculous. I mean, if the commission wants, to add this group to their list, that's fine. But you're doing this on your own private. This is your private request, your private ask.
I am as a
So-
commission member representing the public defense bar. And we have talked, in
That's
fact,
your
we have
own
heard, no, we have heard, no, that is statutorily mandated, what my
Right,
job
but
is.
right now you're
And we have
asking
heard
them
other
to do
labs
something
come and talk
not
about
asked
how they
by the
engage their
commission, though.
stakeholders, and it's okay when they bring it up, but when we say, listen, there's a problem with the integrity and the reliability of your work,
I'm not
will you
disagreeing
talk
with
to
that.
us
I'm not
about it?
disagreeing with that, but it has to come from the commission. This is your
Okay.
own private ask. If the commission agrees that you guys should be added to the list, that's fine.
Great. Should we do that?
That's all I'm saying.
Should we do that?
I mean, Jessica makes a good point, and you walk in the room, you have a different hat, we all do. Some of us are retired judges, prosecutors, extremely talented and gifted laboratory directors, but statutorily, we are from certain, interestingly, walks of hats that we wore in. So you can't completely take it off for that reason, which is a good thing, I think, because it encourages discussion of both points of view and all of those involved. If the legislature didn't think that the defense community was important to consider, Jessica and I would not be in this room. So it's an interesting balance between what our hat in this room and our hat outside the room, but we still wear it because of the statute.
And I don't disagree with you. It's just that, when it comes to requests from labs, it has to come from the commission as a whole.
Any official action, sure. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Am I really the only one that has a question for OCMA on this?
I think
Well,
that
That is
the
shocking.
investigation.
That is shocking.
No, I think that the investigation is ongoing. I think that the information that they've provided to us is,
In executive
Right.
session, so the public is not aware of it.
I think that.
It is a way to shield a discussion that impacts
not-
the work of a public laboratory that affects how many thousands of New Yorkers, and we're going to go take it into executive
It's
session.
not to go to executive session. My point on this is that it's still in an ongoing investigation, and as their counsel stated, once a root cause analysis has been completed, they will come forth with that information, and
Yeah,
that's what we need to focus on.
So then what are we doing in executive session? Why does this have to go in executive
There's
session?
a separate matter for executive session.
Yeah,
This is not.
The likelihood of this not
matter.
becoming public is zero at some point.
I'm sorry, the
The
what?
likelihood of of what we do not becoming public is zero.
Why do you say that?
I'll tell you in executive session. I don't make the rules. No, I'm sure, if it was up to me, there would be no executive session, but it's not up to me, thank God.
But with all due
Okay, so-
respect, this is an initial notification to us that came in our late documents, no less. So this is literally just happening. So I feel like we will hear more about this as the investigation continues.
Sure.
We need more information.
Absolutely.
And an executive session is designed also to protect people who are mentioned, who may be the subject of a possible investigation, some kind of discipline at work. Just like the attorney grievance system is designed to protect attorneys until they've been found to have some reason for a sanction. I mean, just to accuse someone, all of that procedure is confidential, as I'm sure you know.
Sure. So one of the statutorily enumerated purposes of an exception to the public officers law is, as you say, Judge, to protect or an ongoing personnel action. But first, that's discretionary by the commission, if I understand correctly. We don't have to do that. Secondly, this is in the newspaper, right? Their names are in the newspaper. I'm not using their names because I don't see a need to
The names
here.
of lawyers
But
who are
it's literally in
accused-
the newspaper.
The names of lawyers who are involved in discipline are often in the newspaper, and discussions of what they've done is often in the newspaper, but that doesn't in any way affect the obligation of the people involved in the discipline process to maintain that confidentiality. Just because it's in the newspaper, you can't go and give an interview about what the lawyer did or didn't do, or is accused of doing. So, I mean, it's the same concept, I think, with respect to having an executive session regarding misacts of employees or potential misacts of employees. That's how I understood it.
And there's other information that could come out during executive session that's not in the public, so we want to take that.
Well, the
be
same
cautious.
thing happens with respect to lawyers in the discipline process.
But our obligation as a public commission, this is a huge issue. And this impacts the integrity of at least 3 analysts. There's a 4th. And it impacts casework, thousands of cases. This is a matter of public concern. We should discuss it publicly. I mean, sure. Could there be something that is properly dealt with in executive session? Sure. Of course you're right? But I think the default should be public, and I'm glad to see that this did start publicly. I was worried the whole thing would be an executive session, so it's good that it started, but I'm just a little surprised. I'm the only one asking questions at this laboratory. It is surprising.
I think you suggest a pejorative implication
Yes.
to the rest of us. We're not like we're not curious. I'm insanely curious, but I'm going to ask them questions, and they're going to look at me and say, I can't comment on that because it's an ongoing investigation.
Okay.
I have an idea, but apparently I can't discuss it until the executive session. This is all going to come out, but in fairness to us, we just got this stuff a week ago or something. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that by my not asking questions that I don't realize the implications of this, and I feel bad for these people because I know several of them, and this is a shitstorm. I mean,
But
It is indeed.
to imply that the other people here in the room are not concerned, or not informed, or not caring, I think is pretty
disrespectful.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I do mean to express concern that the commission is not doing its task, especially in a matter this serious.
I don't think that's
But
true.
we know this is significant.
time.
Yeah, we know this is significant. We don't know how significant. I think there's a sliding scale
You
here.
don't know how significant?
Just because a
We're saying-
newspaper says something doesn't mean it's true, first of all.
Right,
If
that's
we
just
got a
saying
disclosure
from the
I'm
lab.
just saying, I want to differentiate you pointing it out that it's in the media as gospel.
That
It's
goes
not.
to whether it goes to executive session.
What
That
I'm
is a
telling
different
you
issue.
is that I don't know if the names that they've released in the media are exactly the ones that we have in our executive session. Are they redacted? So we need to get to executive session, and the matters involving what the underlying investigation is executive session, period. Council has determined that. We have determined that. We will talk about it in executive session. They have disclosed what they can disclose at this time upon their initial investigation, and that is it. They have an investigation to do.
Sure, absolutely.
We need to hear the information before we can ask questions and speak on it.
Okay.
I'm not going to ask questions in a theoretical manner. Well, what if this? And what if ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. That's not going to happen. I'm just saying we need to keep it focused on what we can and cannot talk about. We have asked questions. Council has said speculative. We are not going, they cannot answer as to what they think the root cause is or how in-depth the investigation gets. That will determine based on what they look into. We can't go much further than that. And to, again, do not imply that we do not care about this. Please, that is not the case at all.
Okay.
Is there anything else?
Then we go, if an executive session is necessary, that we go to executive session.
Yeah, we're gonna go to executive session. If anything, again, as always, if something happens in executive session that needs to be disclosed to the public, we always come out of executive session and say what action was taken. Okay, let me also say that. That is part of our normal standard Robert's rules law, right? So, do I have a motion to go executive session to discuss the matters relating to a current investigation or matters that may lead to the appointment, promotion, demotion, discipline, or suspension of a particular person?
So moved.
Schmitz has made the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Bev Roush has seconded the motion. When I call on you, please state your vote. My vote is aye. Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Aye.
Judge Mazzarelli? Aye. Dr. Willie?
Aye.
Dr. Buffalino?
Aye.
Ms. Goldthwait?
No.
Ms. Roush?
Aye.
Mr. Epstein?
I'm staying.
Abstain. Dr. Marciano?
Aye.
Ms. Schmitz?
Aye.
And we do have the commissioner who has been on. I've neglected to identify her, but she's under extenuating circumstances may
They're
vote.
required to give.
Aye.
With that, the motion carries. At this point, if you are not a commission member or staff, you'll be expelled from the virtual meeting and you will be asked to leave the room. The streaming will be paused. We're going to take a 5-minute break and then we'll resume. When that is done, we'll come back in executive session. Thank you.
They're finished.
Judge, you have my proxy for whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Commandant. Happy holidays.
Safe trip back. Happy holidays.
Generally don't let you guys speak.
I wanted, the only thing I wanted to say that I didn't is I'm honored to be here where Ben served so well. He was such a brilliant man.
We're back live on YouTube and recording on WebEx.
It's a big responsibility to me to
Thank you,
even try to fill the shoes.
Thank you so much. All right, we're back in open session. No action was taken during the meeting. We'd like to thank you all for your participation today. The next meeting is March 15th. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Epstein has seconded.
My first.
All those state your vote. My vote is aye. Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Aye.
Dr. Marciano?
Aye.
Aye.
Dr. Willie?
Frantic. Aye.
Aye.
Ms. Roush?
Aye.
Mr.
I know, I was gonna
Epstein?
say just a joke, but.
And Ms. Schmitz?
Aye.
With that, the motion carries. We're adjourned. Happy holidays!
Christmas.